Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I'm a park ranger and have been working at Baxter State Park in northern Maine for 8 years. If you've never been here before, let me paint you a picture. Here, there are dense forests covering miles of land with no roads, lakes in depth so deep they don't even have official names, and harsh winters that cause the park to close completely from mid-October to the end of May. Beautiful, yes, but equally unforgiving. If you're not careful, this place will quickly remind you that it doesn't care about you. My name is Merritt, and I've always loved isolated places like this. Growing up in Portland, I dreamed of living somewhere without crowds or noise, and this job gave me that. Most days it's just me, the trees, and the animals that want to show themselves. I check the campgrounds, patrol the trails on routine rounds, and make sure visitors aren't doing anything that could end badly. It's a quiet job, the kind that gives you plenty of time to think. To be honest, maybe too much time. But this story isn't about the usual stuff. It's about something that happened last September, right before the park closed for the season. Something that I still can't fully explain, no matter how many times I've tried to make sense of it. It started with Sam Whitlock. Sam was another ranger, about 10 years older than me, with this weathered face that made him look like he'd been carved out of the same granite that makes up half of Maine. He'd been working at Baxter longer than anyone else on staff, nearly 20 years, and he knew every inch of that park like it was his own backyard. Sam didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. He had this way of saying things that made you feel like he knew more than he was letting on. We weren't exactly friends, but we got along well enough. Most of the time, we'd cross paths at the ranger station or pass each other on the trails, exchanging a quick nod or a few words about the weather. But that September, Sam started acting different. He'd show up to the station looking like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes bloodshot and his hands trembling as he poured himself coffee. When I asked if he was all right, he'd just wave me off and say he was fine, but I could tell he wasn't. Then, one afternoon, Sam pulled me aside after a staff meeting. We were standing outside the station, the late summer sun filtering through the pines, and he looked at me with this intensity I'd never seen from him before. He asked if I'd ever been out to the far end of Moosehead Lake. I told him I hadn't. Moosehead's technically outside Baxter's boundaries, but it's close enough that some of us venture out there during our off days. Sam nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, and then he said something that stuck with me. He said, "Good. Keep it that way." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was just messing with me, but Sam didn't laugh back. He just stared at me for a long moment before turning and walking away. That was the last normal conversation I had with him. A week later, Sam stopped showing up for work. At first, nobody thought much of it. He'd been with the Park Service long enough that he had plenty of vacation days saved up, and it wasn't unusual for rangers to take time off toward the end of the season. But when 3 days turned into a week, and none of us could reach him by phone or radio, the superintendent started to worry. He sent me and another ranger, a younger guy named Tyler, to check on Sam's cabin. Sam lived in a small place about 5 miles from the main station, right on the edge of the park. It wasn't much to look at, just a one-room cabin with a wood stove and a couple of windows, but it suited him. When Tyler and I pulled up in the truck, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. No smoke from the chimney, no lights in the windows, and Sam's truck was nowhere to be seen. We knocked on the door and called out for him, but there was no answer. Tyler tried the handle, and the door swung open easily. It wasn't locked, which wasn't surprising. Out here, most people don't bother with locks. but what we found inside made my stomach drop. The cabin was a mess. I'm not talking about normal clutter or someone living rough for a few days. I'm talking about complete chaos. Furniture was overturned, papers were scattered everywhere, and there were muddy boot prints all over the floor, like someone had been pacing back and forth for hours. On the table, there was a map of the area around Moosehead Lake, and someone, I'm assuming Sam, had circled a specific spot on the far northern end in red marker. Next to the map was a notebook, open to a page filled with scribbled notes that I couldn't quite make out. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and some of the words were smudged like they'd gotten wet. Tyler picked up the notebook and started flipping through it while I looked around the rest of the cabin. In the corner, I found Sam's ranger jacket hanging on a hook, and his duty belt was lying on the floor beneath it. His radio was there too, turned off. That alone was enough to worry me. A ranger never goes anywhere without their radio, especially not Sam. I called out to Tyler, asking if he'd found anything useful in the notebook, and he shook his head. He said most of it was just random observations about the weather and trail conditions, the kind of stuff Sam would normally log in his reports. But the last few pages were different. They were filled with short, disjointed sentences that didn't make much sense. Things like, light under the water, not reflection, and scales on the hull, why scales, and don't go back, can't go back. Tyler looked at me with this confused expression, like he was hoping I could explain what we were reading, but I had no idea. All I knew was that Sam had been out at Moosehead Lake, and whatever he'd seen or experienced there had rattled him badly enough to leave his gear behind and disappear. We reported what we'd found to the superintendent, and he filed a missing persons report with the state police. They did a search of the area around Sam's cabin and sent a couple of officers out to Moosehead Lake to check the spot marked on his map, but they didn't find anything. No sign of Sam, no sign of a struggle, nothing. It was like he'd just vanished. The park closed for the season a few weeks later, and I went back to my place in Portland for the winter. But I couldn't stop thinking about Sam and that map. The circled spot on the far end of Moosehead Lake kept nagging at me, like there was something out there that I needed to see for myself. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I wanted to understand what had happened to a colleague. But deep down, I think I knew there was more to it than that. When the park reopened in late May, I was one of the first rangers back on duty. The snow had mostly melted, but there was still ice on some of the higher trails, and the lakes were just starting to thaw. I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy and not think about Sam, but it didn't help. Every time I looked at a map or passed by his old cabin, I'd feel that same pull, like something was calling me out to Moosehead. It wasn't until mid-June that I finally gave in. I had a couple of days off, and I decided to take a trip out to the lake. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I'm not sure why. Maybe I didn't want them to think I was losing it. Or maybe I just wanted to keep it to myself until I knew what I was dealing with. Either way, I packed my gear, loaded up my truck, and headed north. The drive to Moosehead Lake took about an hour and a half, winding through narrow roads flanked by thick forest. The farther north I went, the more remote everything felt. I passed maybe 2 or 3 other vehicles the entire way, and by the time I reached the lake, it felt like I'd left civilization behind completely. Moosehead is the largest lake in Maine, spanning over 70 square miles, and the northern end, where Sam had marked his map, is one of the most isolated parts. There are no towns, no boat launches, nothing but dense woods and rocky shoreline. I parked my truck at an old logging road that dead-ended near the water and grabbed my pack. Inside, I had a flashlight, a first aid kit, some food, and a handheld GPS unit. I also brought my sidearm, a standard-issue Glock that I rarely carried outside of work. Something about the way Sam's notebook had read made me feel like I should have it, just in case. The walk from the truck to the marked spot on the map took about 40 minutes. The terrain was rough, all uneven ground and fallen logs, and the air had that thick, damp smell you only get near water. When I finally reached the spot, I found myself standing at the edge of a small cove, sheltered on 3 sides by dense trees. The water was still and dark, reflecting the overcast sky like a sheet of black glass. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful, and for a moment I wondered if I'd made the trip for nothing. But then I saw the boat. It was an old aluminum fishing boat, the kind you'd see at any bait shop in the state, half submerged near the shore. The hull was covered in algae and mud, and it looked like it had been there for a while. I waded into the shallow water to get a closer look, and that's when I noticed something strange. The outside of the boat was covered in what looked like fish scales. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stuck to the metal like someone had dumped a bucket of them over the side. They were small, silvery, and still somewhat iridescent even after sitting in the water for who knows how long. I reached out and scraped a few of the scales off with my knife, examining them in the fading light. They looked like perch scales, maybe bass, but there were so many of them that it didn't make sense. Fish scales don't just stick to boats like that, not in those numbers. And why would someone leave a boat out here in the first place? There were no roads nearby, no easy way to haul it in or out. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the battery was dead. I must have forgotten to charge it before I left. Annoyed, I decided to head back to my truck and come back the next day with better equipment. But as I turned to leave, I heard something that made me freeze. It was a sound, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere out on the water. At first, I thought it was a loon. They're common around here, and their calls can be eerie, especially at dusk. But this wasn't a loon. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It sounded almost like tapping. Like someone knocking on wood, slow and steady. I scanned the lake, looking for the source of the sound, but the water was still. No boats, no movement, nothing. The tapping continued for a few more seconds, then stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I stood there for a long time, listening, but the sound didn't come back. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, or maybe some animal I couldn't see, and I started the hike back to my truck. By the time I reached it, the sun had set completely, and the forest was pitch black. I drove back to my cabin, exhausted and more confused than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the boat and those scales and that strange tapping sound. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with one that made sense. And then there was Sam. Had he seen the same thing? Was this what had driven him away? The next morning, I woke up early and made the decision to go back to Moosehead. This time, I'd bring everything I needed to spend the night if necessary. A tent, a sleeping bag, extra batteries for my flashlight, and my radio, just in case. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I couldn't let it go. Not yet. When I arrived at the cove, the boat was still there, exactly where I'd left it. The scales were still stuck to the hull, glinting faintly in the morning light. I set up my tent on a flat patch of ground near the shore, far enough from the water that I wouldn't wake up soaked if the lake rose overnight. Then I spent the rest of the day exploring the area, looking for any clues that might explain what Sam had been doing out here. I didn't find much. A few old beer cans, some fishing line tangled in the bushes, and a rusted tackle box half buried in the mud. Nothing that stood out. As the afternoon wore on, I started to feel like I was wasting my time. Whatever Sam had experienced, it clearly wasn't happening now, and I was beginning to think I'd never figure it out. But then the sun set, and everything changed. The first thing I noticed as darkness fell was the silence. I've spent plenty of nights in the woods, and there's usually some kind of noise. Crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of an animal moving through the underbrush. But that night, there was nothing. It was like the entire forest had gone quiet, holding its breath. I built a small fire near my tent, more for comfort than warmth, and sat down to eat some of the food I'd brought. The flames crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the trees, and I tried to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It's a sensation I've had before, usually when there's a bear or moose nearby, but when I swept my flashlight around the perimeter, I didn't see anything. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the tapping again. It started the same way it had the night before, slow and steady, coming from somewhere out on the water. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down to the shore, scanning the lake with the beam. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the stars overhead, and there was no sign of movement. But the tapping continued, regular as a metronome, echoing faintly across the surface. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just listening, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It seemed to shift, moving around the cove like it was circling me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and I realized my hand was shaking as I held the flashlight. I told myself to calm down, that it was probably just some weird acoustic phenomenon caused by the shape of the cove, but I didn't believe it. There was something deliberate about that sound, something intentional. I went back to my tent and crawled into my sleeping bag, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the roof of the tent and listening to the oppressive quiet outside. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake to the sound of something moving near my tent. It was the middle of the night, and the fire had burned down to embers. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap, shining the light outside. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed the tracks. They were footprints, human-sized, leading from the water's edge up to the side of my tent. They circled around it once, maybe twice, and then led back to the lake. The prints were deep, like whoever made them had been carrying something heavy, and they were wet, leaving dark smudges on the ground. My stomach twisted. I hadn't heard anyone approach, and I was sure I would have if someone had been walking around my campsite. I grabbed my sidearm and stepped out of the tent, sweeping my flashlight across the area. The footprints ended at the water's edge, disappearing into the lake like whoever made them had just walked in and kept going. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. There was no way someone could have walked into the lake and not made a sound. The water was shallow near the shore, and you couldn't take more than a step or two without splashing. But the prints were there, clear as day, and they definitely hadn't been there when I'd set up camp. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the fire, feeding it logs to keep it burning, and kept my flashlight and gun within arm's reach. Every sound, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to see what was out there. As the sun started to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I walked down to the shore one more time. The boat was still there, covered in scales, and the footprints were still visible in the mud. But there was something new. Written in the dirt near the water's edge, in letters that looked like they'd been traced with a finger, were 2 words: "Stay away." I stared at the message, my pulse hammering in my chest. Someone, or something, had been here while I slept. They'd walked around my tent, left those footprints, and written this warning. But why? What were they trying to keep me away from? I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the battery was still dead. Frustrated, I grabbed a stick and copied the message into my own notebook, along with a rough sketch of the footprints. Then I packed up my gear and headed back to my truck. The drive back to my cabin felt surreal. I kept replaying the events of the night in my head, trying to find some explanation that made sense. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. Someone had been out there with me, and they'd gone to great lengths to let me know I wasn't welcome. When I got back to the ranger station, I considered reporting what I'd seen. But what would I even say? That I'd heard strange sounds and found footprints that led into the water? That someone had written a message in the dirt? It sounded insane, and I didn't have any proof. My phone was dead, and I hadn't thought to bring a camera. Instead, I decided to do some research. I spent the next few days digging through old records and reports, looking for anything that might explain what was happening at Moosehead Lake. I found a few incidents that stood out. Back in the 1980s, a group of fishermen reported seeing strange lights under the water near the northern end of the lake. They described them as bright and steady, moving in patterns that didn't match anything natural. The report had been dismissed as a hoax, but reading it now, I wondered if there was more to it. There was also a mention of a missing person case from the early 2000s. A local man had gone out to Moosehead Lake for a solo fishing trip and never came back. His boat was found a week later, drifting near the shore. But there was no sign of the man himself. The authorities ruled it an accidental drowning, but the case file noted that the boat had been in perfect condition, with no signs of damage or struggle. And then there was Sam. His disappearance fit the same pattern. He'd gone out to the lake, seen something that disturbed him, and vanished without a trace. I knew I had to go back. Whatever was happening out there, it was connected to Sam, and maybe even to those older cases. I couldn't just ignore it. This time, I didn't go alone. I reached out to Tyler, the ranger who'd helped me search Sam's cabin, and asked if he wanted to join me. I didn't tell him everything, just that I was following up on some leads related to Sam's disappearance. Tyler agreed without hesitation. He'd been just as bothered by Sam's vanishing as I was, and he wanted answers as much as I did. We made the trip out to Moosehead on a cloudy Saturday morning. The weather was overcast, with a low ceiling of gray clouds that made everything feel closed in. Tyler brought his own gear, including a decent camera and a couple of extra flashlights. I brought my notebook and the map Sam had marked, along with my sidearm. When we reached the cove, Tyler let out a low whistle. "This place is creepy," he said, looking around at the dense trees and dark water. "No wonder Sam was out here. It feels like the kind of place something could happen and nobody would ever know." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The boat was still there, scales and all, and the footprints from my last visit had been washed away by rain. But the message in the dirt was gone too, which made me feel a little better. At least Tyler wouldn't think I was completely crazy. We spent the afternoon exploring the area, taking photos and documenting everything we could find. Tyler was thorough, snapping pictures of the boat, the shoreline, and the surrounding woods. He even waded into the water to get a closer look at the scales on the hull. When he scraped a few off with his knife, he held them up to the light and frowned. "These aren't from any fish I've ever seen," he said. "They're too uniform, too perfect. It's like they were placed here on purpose." I didn't have an answer for that, so I just nodded and kept looking around. As the sun started to set, we decided to set up camp for the night. Tyler seemed excited, like this was some kind of adventure, but I felt nothing but dread. I knew what was coming. We built a fire and cooked some food, talking about Sam and the strange things we'd found so far. Tyler was optimistic, suggesting that maybe Sam had just gotten spooked and left the area to clear his head, but I could tell he didn't really believe it. There was too much that didn't add up. Around midnight, the tapping started. Tyler heard it too this time, and his head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," I said, grabbing my flashlight. "But it's the same sound I heard before." We walked down to the shore together, scanning the water with our lights. The tapping was louder than it had been on my previous visit, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. Tyler swept his flashlight across the lake, but there was nothing to see. Just dark, still water. And then we saw the light. It started as a faint glow, deep beneath the surface, maybe 50 yards from shore. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe from the moon or our flashlights. But the sky was overcast, and the light was too steady, too bright. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat, and as we watched, it began to move. The light drifted closer to the shore, growing brighter as it approached. Tyler grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Cole," he said, his voice shaking. "What is that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too focused on the light, watching as it moved in slow, deliberate circles beneath the water. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. There was no fish, no underwater plant, no piece of equipment that could produce light like that. The tapping grew louder, faster, and the light began to rise toward the surface. I could see the water rippling above it, distorting the glow, and for a moment I thought I saw something else. A shape, dark and massive, moving just beneath the light. And then the light stopped. It hovered maybe 10 feet below the surface, directly in front of us, and the tapping ceased. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of our own breathing. Tyler took a step back, pulling me with him. "We need to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But before we could move, the light shot downward, disappearing into the depths of the lake. The water churned violently for a few seconds, and then everything went still again. We ran back to the tent, threw our gear into our packs, and got the hell out of there. We didn't stop until we reached the truck, and even then Tyler was shaking so badly he could barely buckle his seatbelt. We drove in silence, neither of us willing to talk about what we'd just seen. The drive back felt endless. Tyler kept his window cracked open even though the temperature had dropped into the 40s, and I could see his breath fogging in the cab. Every few minutes, he'd glance in the side mirror like he expected to see something following us. I wanted to tell him we were safe, that whatever we'd seen was miles behind us now, but I couldn't, because I didn't believe it myself. When we finally made it back to the ranger station, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Tyler got out of the truck without saying a word and walked straight to his own vehicle. I called after him, asked if he wanted to grab coffee and talk about what happened, but he just shook his head and drove off. I stood there in the empty parking lot for a long time, listening to the sound of his engine fade into the distance. I didn't file a report that night. I knew I should have, knew that the superintendent would want to know what we'd found, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. How do you explain something like that? How do you write down in an official document that you saw a light moving beneath the water with purpose, with intelligence? They'd think I was losing my mind. Hell, maybe I was. The next morning, I drove to Tyler's apartment. He lived in a small complex about 20 minutes from the park, and when I knocked on his door, it took him a long time to answer. When he finally did, he looked worse than he had the night before. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair was a mess, and he was still wearing the same clothes from our trip to the lake. "Cole," he said, his voice hoarse, "what are you doing here?" "I wanted to check on you," I said. "Make sure you were all right." Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. "All right? I'm not all right. I don't think I'm ever going to be all right again." I pushed my way into his apartment, and what I saw inside worried me even more. Every light in the place was on, blazing bright like he was trying to keep the darkness at bay. His laptop was open on the kitchen table, and when I glanced at the screen, I saw he'd been searching for information about Moosehead Lake. Articles about drownings, missing persons, unexplained phenomena. He'd printed some of them out and taped them to the wall, connecting them with red string like something out of a conspiracy thriller. "Tyler," I said slowly, "what is all this?" "Research," he said, walking over to the wall. "I've been trying to figure out what the hell we saw out there. And you know what I found? We're not the first. People have been seeing weird things at that lake for decades. Lights under the water, strange sounds, boats found with no one inside. There's a pattern, Cole. A pattern that goes back to the 1960s, maybe earlier." He pointed to one of the articles, dated from 1987. It described a group of teenagers who'd gone camping near the northern end of the lake. 3 of them swore they'd seen something moving beneath the surface, something too big to be a fish. The 4th teenager, a girl named Amanda Morrison, had waded into the water to get a closer look and never came back out. The article said her body was never recovered. "Don't you see?" Tyler said, his voice rising. "Whatever's down there, it takes people. It took that girl, it took Sam, and it almost took us." I wanted to argue with him, to tell him he was reading too much into it, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I was thinking the same thing. Over the next few days, I noticed Tyler spiraling. He stopped showing up for work, stopped answering his phone. When I went by his apartment again, he wouldn't let me in. He just stood in the doorway, looking at me with hollow eyes, and said he needed time to think. I reported his absence to the superintendent, told him Tyler wasn't feeling well, but I didn't mention the lake. Not yet. A week after our trip to Moosehead, the superintendent called me into his office. He'd gotten a call from the state police. They wanted to do another search of the area around the lake. A more thorough one this time, and they needed someone from the Park Service to guide them. I volunteered immediately. Maybe I thought I could find some answers, some explanation for what we'd seen. Or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. The dive team arrived 3 days later. There were 6 of them, all experienced divers with top-of-the-line equipment. They set up their operation at the cove where we'd seen the light, and I watched as they geared up and entered the water. The lead diver, a woman named Captain Reeves, told me they'd be doing a systematic search of the lake bed, looking for anything unusual. Bodies, debris, whatever might be down there. I sat on the shore for hours, watching them work. Every time a diver surfaced, I'd ask if they'd found anything, and every time, the answer was the same. Nothing. Just rocks and silt and the occasional fish. No light, no strange formations, nothing that could explain what Tyler and I had witnessed. By the end of the day, Captain Reeves emerged from the water looking frustrated. She pulled off her mask and walked over to where I was sitting. "Mr. Merritt," she said, "I don't know what you and your colleagues saw out here, but there's nothing down there. We dove to a depth of 60 feet, covered the entire cove, and found exactly nothing out of the ordinary." 60 feet, I asked. "How deep is the lake?" "In this area, about 80 feet at the deepest point, but we would have seen anything significant from where we were." I nodded, but I felt sick. Either Tyler and I had hallucinated the entire thing, which seemed impossible since we'd both seen it, or whatever was down there knew how to hide. Before the dive team packed up, I asked Captain Reeves one more question. "Have you ever encountered anything you couldn't explain? Something underwater that just didn't make sense?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I thought she was going to brush me off. But then she said something that stuck with me. "Once," she admitted. "About 10 years ago, we were doing a recovery dive in Lake Champlain. We were looking for a drowning victim, and I swear I saw something down there. Something big, moving through the murk just beyond our lights. My partner saw it too, but when we went to investigate, it was gone. We never found out what it was." "Did you report it?" I asked. She shook her head. What would I have said? That we saw a shadow? People would have laughed us out of the department. So we kept it to ourselves. After the dive team left, I stayed at the cove a little longer. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the water had gone still again. I stood there on the shore, staring out at that dark expanse, and I wondered if it was watching me, if it knew I'd come back. I didn't hear the tapping that night, I didn't see the light, but I felt it. That same pull, that same magnetic force drawing me toward the water. It took everything I had to turn around and walk away. It's been 3 months since that night, and I still don't have any answers. Tyler and I reported what we saw to the superintendent, and he filed it away with the rest of Sam's case. The state police sent a dive team out to Moosehead Lake a few weeks later, but they didn't find anything. No light, no strange shapes, nothing. Just water and rocks and fish. Tyler quit the Park Service shortly after. He said it wasn't because of what we saw that he'd been thinking about leaving for a while, but I didn't believe him. I could see it in his eyes every time we crossed paths at the station. He was scared, and he didn't want to be anywhere near that lake ever again. I can't say I blame him. I've thought about quitting too, more times than I can count, but something keeps me here. Maybe it's the need to understand what happened to Sam, or maybe it's just stubbornness. Either way, I'm still at Baxter, still doing my job, still trying to make sense of it all. The boat is still out there, covered in scales. I've been back a few times since that night, always during the day, always armed. The tapping hasn't come back and neither has the light, but I know it's still there, waiting, whatever it is. I've started keeping a journal, just like Sam did. I document everything I see, every strange sound or unexplained occurrence, hoping that someday it'll all make sense. So far, it hasn't. But I keep writing anyway. Last week, I found something at Sam's old cabin. The superintendent had finally given me permission to clear it out, to pack up Sam's things and donate them or throw them away. I didn't want to do it, but somebody had to, and I felt like I owed it to him. Most of his stuff was just the usual ranger gear: clothes, boots, books about forestry and wildlife. But in the back of a drawer, I found another notebook. It was older than the one we'd found before, the pages yellowed and brittle. The entries dated back almost 10 years, and they detailed Sam's trips to Moosehead Lake. He'd been going there for a long time, longer than I'd realized. The early entries were mundane, just notes about fishing and weather conditions, but as I read further, they started to change. Sam began writing about the light, describing it in the same way Tyler and I had seen it. He wrote about the tapping, the footprints, the scales on the boat. He'd experienced all of it, over and over, for years. And then, near the end of the notebook, I found an entry that made my blood run cold. It was dated 2 days before Sam disappeared. In shaky handwriting, he'd written, "I know what it is now. I know what's under the water. It's been watching me, waiting for me to come back. I can't ignore it anymore. I have to go. I have to see it for myself, even if it means I don't come back. If you're reading this, Cole, don't follow me. Don't go to the lake. It's not worth it. Some things are better left alone." I sat there in Sam's empty cabin, holding that notebook, and I felt something break inside me. Sam had known. He'd known exactly what he was walking into, and he'd gone anyway. And now he was gone, just like that fisherman from the 2000s, just like whoever else had stumbled across that cursed place over the years. I should have listened to him. I should have stayed away. But I didn't. And now I can't stop thinking about that light, that shape moving beneath the water. I dream about it sometimes, see it pulsing in the darkness, calling to me. I've made a decision. I'm going back to Moosehead Lake one more time. Not to camp, not to investigate, just to see if it's still there. And if it is, I'm going to do what Sam couldn't, I'm going to leave it alone. Some things, like Sam said, are better left alone. But knowing that and doing it are two very different things. 2 weeks after I found Sam's notebook, I made my final trip to Moosehead Lake. It was late October, just before the park closed for the season, and the weather had turned cold. A thin layer of ice was starting to form on the edges of the lake, and the trees were bare, their branches skeletal against the gray sky. I didn't bring Tyler this time. I didn't bring anyone. This was something I needed to do alone. I parked my truck at the same logging road and made the walk to the cove. The boat was still there, but the ice had started to cover it, freezing the scales into the hull. I stood on the shore for a long time, just looking at the water, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. No tapping, no light, no footprints. Just silence and cold, and the faint smell of decay from the rotting leaves underfoot. I thought about Sam, about how he'd stood in this exact spot, knowing what was down there and going in anyway. I thought about the fisherman who'd disappeared, about the lights the others had seen. And I thought about Tyler, shaking in my truck, too scared to ever come back. I pulled out Sam's notebook and read the last entry one more time. Some things are better left alone. He was right. I know he was right. But standing there looking at that dark water, I felt the pull again. That same irresistible urge to step forward, to wade in, to see what was beneath the surface. I didn't do it. I turned around and walked back to my truck, and I haven't been back since. But I think about it every day. I think about Sam, about what he found down there, about whether he's still alive somewhere, or if the lake took him like it's taken so many others. I don't know if I'll ever have answers. Maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. Some places are meant to stay unexplored. All I know is this. If you ever find yourself near the northern end of Moosehead Lake, and you see an old aluminum boat covered in scales, don't go near it. Don't camp there. Don't investigate. Don't even stop to look. Just keep walking. Because whatever's under that water, it's watching. And it's waiting. And if you're not careful, you might be the next person to disappear. I submitted Sam's notebook to the state police, and they added it to his case file. They didn't reopen the investigation. As far as they're concerned, Sam Whitlock is just another missing person, another name on a list that grows longer every year. But I know better. I know what happened to him, even if I can't prove it. And I know that someday, someone else is going to find that cove, that boat, that light beneath the water. And they're going to make the same choice Sam did. I just hope they're smarter than he was. I hope they turn around and leave before it's too late. As for me, I'm done. I've put in my notice with the Park Service, and I'll be moving back to Portland by the end of the month. I've spent enough time in these woods, enough time thinking about things that don't make sense. I'm ready to go back to the noise and the crowds, to the world where things follow rules and logic, where the only monsters are the ones you can see. But even as I pack my things and prepare to leave, I know I'll never really escape. That lake, that light, that tapping sound, they're all burned into my memory now. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and still, I hear it again. Tap, tap. Slow and steady, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere in the darkness. And I know it's waiting for me to come back. But I won't, I can't. Because some things, as Sam said, are better left alone. And I've finally learned to listen. I'm a park ranger, and what I'm about to tell you happened during my 5th year working at the Allagash Wilderness Waterway in northern Maine. If you've never heard of it, the Allagash is about as remote as it gets in the continental United States. We're talking 92 miles of rivers, lakes, and streams cutting through dense forest with only a handful of ranger stations scattered along the route. It's the kind of place where you can go days without seeing another person, where the silence is so complete it feels like pressure against your eardrums. My name's Lydia Boone, and I've always been comfortable with isolation. I grew up in rural Vermont, spent my childhood hiking and camping with my father, and I'd take a quiet forest over a crowded city any day of the week. But there's isolation, and then there's what I experienced on the old Northern Patrol line. That's a different kind of alone, the kind that gets inside your head and stays there. It started in early October, just before the waterway closed for the season. My supervisor, a gruff man named Bill McKenzie, who'd been with the Park Service since the 80s, called me into his office at the main station. He had a map spread out on his desk, marked with red lines indicating patrol routes, and he was tapping his finger on a section in the far north. "Lydia," he said, not looking up from the map, "I need you to do a final sweep of the old northern line before we shut down for winter." I leaned over the desk to get a better look. The northern line was a route that hadn't been actively patrolled in years. Not since they'd consolidated operations and closed Station 7 back in 2011. It ran through some of the most isolated parts of the waterway, following an old logging road that had mostly been reclaimed by forest. "Why now?" I asked. "That route's been dormant for almost a decade." Bill finally looked up at me, and I noticed the dark circles under his eyes. He'd been working double shifts trying to cover for rangers who'd quit or transferred out. "State's doing an assessment of all our infrastructure. They want documentation on every station and patrol route, even the abandoned ones. I need photos, a condition report, the whole 9 yards." "You want me to go alone?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. We were understaffed, and there was nobody else available. "You'll have Harper Vance with you," Bill said. "She's transferring in from Acadia next week. This'll be her orientation." I didn't know Harper then, but I'd heard the name. Word travels fast in the ranger community, and Harper had a reputation. She'd been involved in some kind of incident at Acadia the previous summer, something that resulted in a formal reprimand and her transfer north. Nobody seemed to know the exact details, but the rumors ranged from insubordination to a mental breakdown in the field. I wasn't sure what to believe. Harper arrived the following Tuesday, driving up in a beat-up Ford Ranger with Massachusetts plates. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 26 or 27, with short dark hair and the kind of sharp, watchful eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. When Bill introduced us, she shook my hand firmly and said, "Lydia, good to meet you. Bill says you're the one who knows these woods." "I know them well enough," I said. "You ever worked a route this remote?" "Acadia's not exactly Times Square," Harper replied with a slight smile. "I think I'll manage." We spent the next 2 days preparing for the patrol. The northern line would take us 4 days to complete, possibly 5 if the weather turned. We'd need to carry everything with us: camping gear, food, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, and the documentation equipment Bill had requested. I packed my standard patrol kit, compass, GPS unit, radio, flares, and my service sidearm. Harper brought her own gear, and I noticed she packed light, efficiently, like someone who'd done this kind of work before. On Thursday morning, we loaded our packs into Bill's truck and drove north to the trailhead. The access road was barely more than 2 ruts cutting through the forest, and it dead-ended at a rusted gate with a faded sign that read, "Restricted access, authorized personnel only." Beyond the gate, I could see the old patrol road disappearing into the trees, overgrown but still visible. Bill helped us unload our gear, then paused before getting back in the truck. "You girls have your radios?" "Yes, sir," I said, patting my belt. "Good. Check in every 12 hours. And Lydia?" He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. If something feels wrong out there, trust your gut. Don't push it. It was an odd thing to say, and I wanted to ask what he meant, but Harper was already shouldering her pack and opening the gate. Bill gave us a final nod and drove off, leaving us standing at the threshold of the old northern line. The first few hours of hiking were uneventful. The patrol road was overgrown but still passable, winding through dense stands of pine and birch. The air was cool and damp, carrying that distinctive smell of autumn decay, fallen leaves and rotting wood, and the earthy scent of mushrooms. Harper moved quietly beside me, not talking much but clearly alert, her eyes constantly scanning the forest around us. Around noon, we stopped for lunch at a small clearing where someone had once maintained a primitive campsite. The fire ring was still there, though it was choked with weeds, and there was a weathered picnic table that looked like it might collapse if you leaned on it too hard. Harper pulled out her water bottle and took a long drink, then looked at me. "So, what's the story with this patrol line? Why'd they shut it down?" "Budget cuts, mostly," I said, unwrapping a granola bar. "Back in 2011, the state had to trim a lot of fat from park services. They consolidated operations, closed a bunch of the smaller stations. Station 7 was one of them." "Station 7, Harper repeated. "That's where we're heading?" I nodded. "It's about 15 miles north of here. Should reach it tomorrow afternoon, if we keep good pace." "What's it like?" Harper asked. "The station, I mean." I thought about it. I'd only been to Station 7 once, years ago during my training, and my memories of it were vague. Small, one-room cabin, basically. It was never meant to house more than 2 rangers at a time. Mostly, it was just a shelter point, somewhere to get out of the weather and store supplies. Harper was quiet for a moment, chewing her sandwich. Then she said, "I heard they found something there before they closed it." I looked at her sharply. "Who told you that?" "Just rumors," she said with a shrug. "You know how rangers talk." "Someone mentioned it when I was processing my transfer paperwork." "What kind of rumors?" I pressed. Harper met my eyes. "That the last ranger stationed there had some kind of episode. Stopped making sense on the radio, started reporting things that weren't there. They pulled her out and closed the station a week later." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd never heard that particular story, but it didn't surprise me. Remote duty can mess with people's heads, especially if they're out there alone for too long. The isolation, the monotony, the endless trees, it wears on you. "Well," I said finally, "whatever happened, it was a long time ago. The station's been empty for years." Harper didn't respond to that. She just finished her sandwich and shouldered her pack. "We should keep moving," she said. "Want to make good distance before dark." We hiked until the light started to fail, then set up camp in a flat area beside the old patrol road. I pitched my tent while Harper gathered firewood, and soon we had a decent blaze going. The temperature had dropped with the sunset, and I was grateful for the warmth. As we sat by the fire, Harper pulled out a small notebook and started writing in it. I asked her what she was documenting, and she said it was just a personal log, something she'd always done in the field. She wrote for maybe 10 minutes, her pen moving steadily across the page, then closed the notebook and tucked it back into her pack. "You ever get scared out here?" Harper asked, suddenly, "alone in the woods?" I thought about the question. Not scared, exactly, but aware. You're always aware that you're small and the forest is big, and if something goes wrong, you're on your own. "That's what I like about it," Harper said, staring into the flames. "Nobody to rely on but yourself. No politics, no bureaucracy, just you and the work." "Is that why you transferred?" I asked. "To get away from all that?" Harper's expression hardened slightly. "Something like that." I didn't push. Whatever had happened at Acadia, it was clear she didn't want to talk about it. We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the fire burn down, then crawled into our tents and tried to sleep. I woke sometime in the middle of the night to the sound of an owl hooting. It was close, maybe 30 yards away, and its call echoed through the trees with an eerie, hollow quality. I lay there listening, waiting for the sound to fade, but it went on, insistent, and somehow wrong. Owls don't usually call continuously like that. They hoot, wait, hoot again. But this one just kept going, a steady rhythm that set my teeth on edge. Eventually, I unzipped my tent and looked outside. The fire had burned down to embers, barely giving off any light, and the forest was pitch black. I couldn't see Harper's tent, though I knew it was only a few feet away. The owl call continued, and I realized it was coming from directly above me, up in the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it upward, sweeping the beam through the branches. For just a second, I thought I saw something up there, a dark shape that was too big to be an owl. But when I focused the light on it, there was nothing, just empty branches swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. The hooting stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt oppressive. I stood there for a long moment, my flashlight still pointed at the trees, waiting for the sound to start again. It didn't. Eventually, I crawled back into my tent, but I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, Harper was already up when I emerged from my tent. She was crouched by the remains of the fire trying to coax it back to life, and when she saw me, she nodded. "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "You hear that owl last night?" Harper looked up at me, her expression neutral. "What owl?" "There was an owl," I said slowly. "Right above camp. It was calling for maybe 10, 15 minutes. You didn't hear it?" Harper shook her head. "I slept through the night, didn't hear anything." I wanted to argue, to insist that the sound had been loud enough to wake the dead, but I stopped myself. Maybe Harper was a deeper sleeper than I'd thought. Or maybe I'd been dreaming. Either way, it didn't matter now. We broke camp and continued north. The patrol road became harder to follow as we went. In places it was barely visible, just a slight depression in the forest floor where the vegetation grew a little differently. I kept checking my GPS to make sure we were still on track, and Harper followed close behind, quiet and watchful. Around midday, we came to a stream that cut across the old road. The water was shallow but fast-moving, and there was no bridge, just some rotting planks half submerged in the current. I tested them carefully with my boot, but they shifted under my weight, clearly unsafe. "We'll have to wade," I said, unlacing my boots. Harper did the same, and we crossed the stream in our socks, the icy water numbing our feet instantly. On the far side, we sat on a fallen log to dry off and put our boots back on. That's when I noticed Harper staring at something downstream. "What is it?" I asked, following her gaze. "There," she said, pointing. "You see that?" I looked where she was pointing and saw what had caught her attention. About 50 yards downstream, there was something caught in the rocks, something that looked almost like a piece of clothing, dark and waterlogged, flapping slightly in the current. "Probably just trash," I said. "Hikers leave all kinds of crap in these woods." "Maybe," Harper said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Should we check it out?" I didn't particularly want to, but Harper was already standing up, her boots half-laced, heading downstream toward whatever was caught in the rocks. I sighed and followed her. As we got closer, I could see it wasn't clothing, it was a pack. A ranger pack, the old-style canvas kind they used to issue before they switched to the modern synthetic ones. It was wedged between two large rocks, half submerged and obviously been there for a while. Harper waded into the stream and pulled it free. Water poured out as she lifted it, and she carried it back to shore. The pack was in terrible shape. The canvas rotted and torn, the straps mostly disintegrated. But when Harper opened it, we found something that made my stomach drop. Inside was a ranger's logbook, protected by a waterproof case that had somehow remained intact. Harper opened the case and pulled out the book. The pages were damp but readable, and the last entry was dated September 14, 2011. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but I could make out the words. "Can't stay at the station anymore. Something's wrong with the patrol line. The maps don't match. The trails loop back. I'm heading south. If you find this, don't go to Station 7. Harper and I looked at each other. She was the first to speak. "This is from before they closed the station." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is. We should turn back," Harper said, and there was no hesitation in her voice. "Whatever this ranger was dealing with, we don't need to walk into it." Part of me agreed with her. The warning in that logbook was clear, and there was something deeply unsettling about finding it after all these years. But another part of me, the stubborn part that had kept me in this job through all the hard times, wanted to see this through. "We have a job to do," I said. "Bill's counting on us to document that station." "Bill's counting on us to come back," Harper countered. "Dead rangers don't file reports. We don't know that ranger's dead," I said, though I didn't believe it. "And we don't know what they were dealing with. Could have been anything. Medical issue, psychological break, who knows?" Harper stared at me for a long moment, then closed the logbook and put it back in the waterproof case. "Fine," she said. "But we're staying sharp. First sign of anything weird, anything at all, we're out of here. Agreed?" "Agreed," I said. We continued north, but the mood had changed. Both of us were tense now, hyper-aware of our surroundings in a way we hadn't been before. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow looked suspicious. The forest, which had felt peaceful that morning, now felt hostile, like it was watching us and waiting for something. Station 7 came into view just as the sun was starting to set. It sat in a small clearing at the end of the patrol road, a simple log cabin with a peaked roof and a small covered porch. The windows were shuttered, and the whole structure had that abandoned look, the kind of weathered decay that comes from years of neglect. Harper and I approached slowly, both of us with our hands near our sidearms, though I wasn't sure what we expected to find. The door was closed but not locked, and when I pushed it open, the hinges creaked loudly in the silence. Inside, the cabin was dim and musty. There was a layer of dust on everything, and the air had that stale quality of a place that hadn't been opened in years. The interior was exactly as I remembered it from my training. One room with a small wood stove in the corner, a bunk bed against one wall, a table and 2 chairs in the center, and some shelves holding old supplies. Everything looked untouched, frozen in time from the day they'd closed the station. Except for one thing. On the table, sitting in the middle of all that dust, was a coffee mug, and it was steaming. Harper and I stood in the doorway, staring at that impossible mug of coffee. Steam rose from it in lazy curls, and I could smell it, fresh and strong, like someone had just poured it seconds ago. "Lydia," Harper said quietly, "tell me you see that." "I see it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what we were looking at. There was no logical explanation. The station had been abandoned for years. There was no one here, no vehicle outside, no sign of recent habitation, and yet that coffee was fresh. Finally, Harper took a step into the cabin. "Hello?" she called out. "Anyone here?" No answer. Just the sound of the wind outside and the faint creak of the cabin settling. I followed Harper inside, my hand now definitely on my sidearm. We searched the cabin systematically, checking every corner, looking in the storage closet, even checking under the bunks. There was nobody there. We were completely alone. Harper walked over to the table and stood over the mug, looking down at it like it might bite her. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." I pulled out my radio and keyed the mic. "Station 1, this is Boone, come in." Static. I tried again, adjusting the frequency but got nothing but white noise. We were too far out, too deep in the forest. The radio was useless. Harper reached out slowly and touched the side of the mug with one finger, then jerked her hand back. "It's hot," she said. "Really hot, like it was just poured." I looked around the cabin again, searching for any explanation. That's when I noticed something else that was wrong. The logbook, the one that should have been sitting on the shelf by the door, was lying open on the table next to the coffee mug. I walked over and looked at it. The entries were old, dating back to 2011, routine patrol logs and weather observations. But the last page, the very last entry, was different. The handwriting was shaky and rushed, and it was dated today. October 17th, the same day we'd arrived. I felt my blood run cold as I read the words. "Arrived at Station 7 with Boone. Found coffee on table. Something's very wrong here. We need to leave." The handwriting was Harper's. I looked up at her, and she was staring at the notebook on the table with wide eyes. I watched as she reached into her pack and pulled out her personal log, the one I'd seen her writing in the night before. She opened it to the last page she'd written, and held it up next to the station logbook. The handwriting was identical. "I didn't write that," Harper said, her voice shaking slightly. "Lydia, I swear to God, I didn't write that." I believed her. I'd seen her write in her own notebook, and she'd never touched the station log. But there it was, in her handwriting, an entry that shouldn't exist. "We're leaving," I said, making the decision quickly. "Right now. We'll camp a few miles south and figure this out in the morning." Harper didn't argue. She grabbed her pack and headed for the door, and I was right behind her. But when I reached the threshold, I made the mistake of looking back one more time. The coffee mug was gone. The table was empty except for the logbook, which was now closed. And I could have sworn, though I can't be certain, that I saw the logbook's cover move slightly, like someone had just shut it. We practically ran from that cabin, not stopping until we were a good quarter-mile down the patrol road. By then, the sun had fully set, and we were using our flashlights to navigate through the darkness. We didn't speak, just kept moving, putting distance between us and Station 7. Eventually, Harper stopped and put her hand on my arm. "We need to camp," she said. "We can't keep going in the dark. Too easy to get lost or hurt." She was right, but I didn't want to stop. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving, to get as far from that station as possible. But Harper was thinking clearly, being practical, and I forced myself to calm down. We set up camp hastily, barely speaking to each other as we pitched our tents and gathered wood for a fire. Once we had a blaze going, we sat close to it, neither of us wanting to be more than arm's length from the light. "What the hell was that?" Harper finally asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never seen anything like it." "The coffee was real," Harper said. "I touched it. It was hot." "I know." "And the logbook. My handwriting. How is that possible?" I shook my head. I had no answers. Nothing in my training, nothing in all my years of working in remote wilderness had prepared me for something like this. Harper pulled out her personal log again and opened it to the last page she'd written. She stared at it for a long moment, then flipped to the next blank page. "I'm going to write down what happened," she said. "Document it. If something happens to us, maybe someone will find this and understand." She started writing, her pen moving quickly across the page. I watched her for a few seconds, then pulled out my own notebook and did the same. We wrote in silence, the only sounds the scratch of pen on paper and the crackle of the fire. When I finished writing, I looked up and saw that Harper had stopped. She was staring at her notebook with a look of absolute horror on her face. "Harper," I said, "what's wrong?" She didn't answer. She just turned the notebook around and showed me what she'd written. The words on the page weren't what she'd been writing. Instead, there was just one sentence, repeated over and over in her handwriting. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here." The sentence filled the entire page, getting smaller and more cramped toward the bottom, like she'd been writing faster and faster. "I didn't write that," Harper said, her voice cracking. "I was writing about the station, about the coffee mug. This isn't what I wrote." I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. This was wrong, all of it was wrong, and we needed to get out of here. But we were miles from the nearest road in complete darkness, with no working radio. "Tomorrow," I said, trying to sound calm. "First light, we head south as fast as we can. We forget about the patrol, forget about the documentation. We just get the hell out of here." Harper nodded, closing her notebook with shaking hands. "I'm not sleeping tonight," she said. "I can't. Not after this." "Me neither," I said. We sat by the fire for hours, feeding it constantly, keeping it bright. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? We'd encountered something that defied explanation, something that had no place in the rational world we thought we lived in. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the forest. They were distant at first, barely audible over the crackle of the fire, but they were definitely there. Slow, steady footsteps, like someone walking through the underbrush. Harper heard them too. She grabbed her flashlight and shone it into the darkness, sweeping the beam through the trees. The footsteps stopped immediately. "Hello?" Harper called out, her voice stronger than I expected. "Who's there?" No answer. Just silence. The footsteps started again, closer this time. They seemed to be circling our camp, moving through the forest just beyond the reach of our firelight. I could hear branches snapping, leaves rustling, but I couldn't see anyone. "This is a restricted patrol route," I called out, my hand on my sidearm. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped again, and then, from somewhere in the darkness, I heard a voice. It was faint, distorted, like it was coming from very far away or through water. But I recognized it. It was my own voice. "Don't go to Station 7, my voice said from the darkness. "The maps don't match. The trails loop back." Those were the words from the logbook we'd found in the stream, the ones written by the ranger who disappeared in 2011. Harper grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "That's you," she whispered. "That's your voice." "I know," I said, my throat tight. The footsteps started moving again, faster now, and I could hear something else. More voices, all around us, some speaking in whispers I couldn't make out, others clearer. I heard Harper's voice coming from the north saying, "Something's wrong with the patrol line." I heard my own voice from the west, saying, "We need to leave." I heard other voices too, voices I didn't recognize, all of them overlapping and echoing through the forest. "We need to move," Harper said urgently. "Now." "Where?" I asked. We can't see anything beyond the fire. We'll get lost." "We're already lost," Harper said, and there was something in her voice that made me look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Don't you get it, Lydia? We've been lost since we got here. This place, it's not right. It's not following normal rules." The voices grew louder, closer, and now I could hear footsteps all around us. dozens of them, all moving toward our camp. Harper stood up, her flashlight sweeping frantically through the trees, but there was nothing to see. Just darkness and those impossible sounds. And then, just as suddenly as they'd started, the sounds stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest. So abrupt, it was almost painful. Harper and I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. In the silence, I heard a new sound. It was quiet, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was the sound of a pen writing on paper. I looked down at my feet and saw my notebook lying open on the ground. I didn't remember dropping it. The pages were flipping on their own, as if moved by a wind I couldn't feel, and stopping on a blank page. As I watched, words began to appear on the page, forming themselves in my handwriting, even though I was holding my pen in my hand. The words said, "You're going back to the station tomorrow. You have to document it. Those are your orders." Harper saw it too. She picked up her own notebook from where she'd left it by the fire, and it was the same. Words forming on the page in her handwriting. "Bill needs the report. You can't leave without completing the patrol." "No," Harper said firmly, throwing her notebook into the fire. "No, we're not going back there. I don't care what Bill needs. I don't care about the job. We're leaving." I wanted to throw my notebook in the fire too, wanted to run, but something stopped me. A thought that didn't feel like it came from me. The thought was simple and compelling. If you don't complete the patrol, you'll never leave these woods. I tried to push the thought away, but it stuck in my mind, growing stronger. I looked at Harper and saw her face change, saw the same realization dawn on her. "We have to go back," I said, and the words felt wrong coming out of my mouth, like I was speaking someone else's script. "We have to finish the documentation." "No," Harper said, but her voice was weak, uncertain. "No, that's not. We don't have to." But even as she spoke, I saw her shoulders slump in defeat. She felt it too. Whatever force was at work here, it wasn't giving us a choice. We spent the rest of the night by the fire, not speaking, both of us trapped in our own thoughts. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink, we broke camp in silence and started walking north, back toward the Station 7. The walk back to the station felt wrong from the start. The patrol road that we'd hiked down the night before didn't look the same in the morning light. The trees were in different positions, or at least they seemed to be. Landmarks, I remembered, a distinctive boulder, a lightning-struck pine, were missing or moved. I kept checking my GPS, but the coordinates were drifting, the numbers changing even when we were standing still. Harper walked beside me, her face set in grim determination. We didn't talk about what had happened, didn't discuss the voices or the notebooks or the compulsion that was driving us back to that cursed cabin. What was there to say? We reached Station 7 just after noon. It looked exactly as we'd left it, the door still standing open, the windows still shuttered. But something felt different. The air around the cabin was heavier, thicker, like we were walking through water. I stopped at the threshold and looked at Harper. "Ready?" She shook her head. "No, but let's get this over with." We entered the cabin together. The interior was the same as before, dust-covered and abandoned, but the coffee mug was back on the table, and it was steaming again. Harper let out a bitter laugh. "Of course it is." I walked over to the table and looked down at the mug. Next to it was a camera, an old digital model that looked like it dated back to the early 2000s. I picked it up and turned it on. The battery indicator showed full charge. "I guess this is how we're supposed to document," I said, holding up the camera. Harper pulled out her own camera, the one she'd brought from Acadia. "I'll use mine," she said. I don't trust anything in this place. We spent the next hour photographing everything in the cabin. The condition of the walls, the wood stove, the storage shelves, every detail Bill had asked us to document. The whole time, that coffee mug sat on the table, still steaming, and I tried not to look at it. When we were finished, Harper lowered her camera and said, "Can we go now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Do you feel like we're done?" Harper thought about it, then shook her head. "No, it feels like there's something else. Something we're missing." I felt it too. That nagging sense that our task wasn't complete, that there was one more thing required of us. I looked around the cabin, searching for what it might be, and my eyes fell on the logbook still sitting on the table. "The log," I said. "We need to make an entry." Harper's expression darkened. "The hell we do. That log tried to mess with our heads. I'm not touching it." But I was already walking toward the table. I picked up the logbook and opened it to the last page. The entry I'd seen yesterday, the one written in Harper's handwriting, was gone. The page was blank, waiting. I pulled out a pen and started to write. I documented our arrival at the station, the condition of the facility, everything we'd photographed. My handwriting was steady, professional. This was just a routine report, I told myself. Just standard ranger procedure. When I finished, I set the pen down and closed the logbook. The moment I did, something changed. The air in the cabin seemed to lighten, and that oppressive weight lifted slightly. I could breathe easier. Harper must have felt it too, because she said, "Is that it? Are we done?" "I think so," I said. "Let's get out of here." We grabbed our packs and headed for the door. But as I was leaving, I made the mistake of looking back one more time. The coffee mug was gone again, and the logbook was open to a different page. I could see writing on it, but it was too far away to read. I should have kept walking. I should have followed Harper out that door and never looked back. But something made me turn around and walk back to the table. The open page was dated tomorrow, October 18th, and it was written in my handwriting. The entry read, "Harper and I completed the patrol of Station 7. Condition is poor but stable. Recommend demolition. We departed the station at 1400 hours and made camp 4 miles south. Weather clear, no incidents to report." I stared at that entry, my mind trying to process what I was reading. It was tomorrow's log entry written today, describing things that hadn't happened yet. But the part that terrified me most was the last line, "No incidents to report." Because there had been incidents. Major, reality-breaking incidents. But according to this entry, written in my own handwriting, I was going to report that nothing had happened. "Lydia?" Harper's voice came from the doorway. "What are you doing? Let's go." I closed the logbook and turned to face her. "Harper, something's wrong. Really wrong." "I know," she said. "This whole place is wrong. That's why we need to leave." "No, you don't understand," I said. "The logbook has an entry for tomorrow. It says we're going to report that nothing happened, that there were no incidents." Harper's face went pale. "Show me." I opened the logbook again, but the page had changed. Now it was blank, just like all the others. The entry I'd just read was gone. "It was there," I said desperately. "I saw it. It said we'd report no incidents, like none of this ever happened." Harper grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. "We're leaving now. Whatever's happening here, we're not staying to find out what comes next." We left the cabin and started south on the patrol road. This time, I didn't look back. I kept my eyes forward, focused on putting one foot in front of the other, putting distance between us and Station 7. We hiked hard, stopping only briefly to drink water. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when we reached the stream where we'd found the abandoned ranger pack. I expected to see the pack still there, caught in the rocks, But it was gone. The rocks were there, the stream was there, but there was no sign of the pack or the logbook we'd found inside it. Harper noticed the same thing. "It's gone," she said. "The pack. It was right there." "I know," I said. "Maybe the current moved it." But we both knew that wasn't true. The pack had been wedged firmly between those rocks, and the current wasn't strong enough to move it. We crossed the stream and continued south. The patrol road was getting harder to follow again, overgrown and indistinct. I checked my GPS, but the coordinates were wrong. According to the device, we were still at Station 7, even though we'd been walking for hours. "My GPS is broken," I said, showing it to Harper. She checked hers and shook her head. "Mine too. Says we're at the station." We were lost. Despite following the same route we'd taken on the way in, despite all our training and experience, we were completely turned around. The forest seemed to shift around us, the trees rearranging themselves when we weren't looking. As the sun set, we were forced to make camp again. We set up our tents mechanically, not speaking, both of us exhausted and frightened. This time, we didn't bother with the fire. We just crawled into our tents and lay there in the darkness, listening to the forest. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke to the sound of Harper calling my name. Her voice was panicked, urgent. I scrambled out of my tent and found her standing in the middle of our campsite. Her flashlight pointed at something on the ground. It was the coffee mug from the station, sitting right there in the dirt between our tents, steam rising from it in the cold night air. "How?" Harper asked, her voice breaking. "How is this possible?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't even process what I was seeing. We were miles from the station. We'd hiked all day, and yet here was that impossible mug of coffee, still hot, still waiting. Harper picked up the mug and threw it into the trees. We heard it hit something and shatter, and for a moment, there was satisfaction in that sound. We'd broken it, destroyed it, taken some small measure of control. But when Harper turned her flashlight back to where the mug had been, there was something else sitting in the dirt. A piece of paper folded neatly. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing the patrol road in Station 7 and our current position. Except our position on the map was wrong. According to this map, we weren't south of the station, we were north of it. We'd been hiking in the wrong direction all day. "No," Harper said, looking at the map over my shoulder. "That's not right. We've been going south. I've been tracking our direction." "I know," I said, "but look." I pulled out my compass and held it under my flashlight. The needle was spinning slowly, not pointing north, just rotating in lazy circles. Harper's compass did the same thing. "The maps don't match," I said quietly, remembering the words from the abandoned logbook. "The trails loop back." Harper sank to the ground, her head in her hands. "We're never getting out of here, are we?" she said. "Whatever happened to that ranger in 2011, whatever happened to everyone who came to Station 7, it's happening to us." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her we'd be fine, that we just needed to stay calm and think rationally, but I couldn't, because I was starting to believe she was right. We spent another sleepless night huddled together near our tents, watching the darkness. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? We were trapped in something we didn't understand, following rules that made no sense. When dawn finally came, I stood up and made a decision. "We're not hiking blind anymore," I said. "We need to use the map we were given." "The map that says we're north of the station when we should be south?" Harper asked. "Yes, because maybe that map is telling the truth. Maybe we have been going the wrong direction. Maybe this place doesn't follow normal geography." Harper looked at me like I was crazy, but after a moment she nodded. "Fine. At this point, what do we have to lose?" We packed up camp and started walking north, following the directions on the hand-drawn map. It felt wrong, counterintuitive, like we were walking deeper into danger rather than away from it. But we kept going. The forest around us seemed different as we walked. The trees were spaced oddly, too uniform in places and then chaotically dense in others. The light filtering through the canopy had a strange quality, like it was coming from the wrong angle for the time of day, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by our footsteps and our breathing. After an hour of walking, Harper stopped abruptly. "Lydia," she said, her voice tight. "Look at this." She was pointing at a tree beside the path. Carved into the bark, maybe 6 feet up, were initials and a date. JM 2011. I felt my stomach clench. JM. The ranger who'd disappeared. The one who'd left the warning in the abandoned pack. They'd been here, on this exact path, carving their initials into this tree. And then they'd vanished. "Keep moving," I said, not wanting to think about what those initials meant. "Don't stop." We continued north, and after another 30 minutes we came across something else. A campsite, or what was left of one. The fire ring was old, filled with years of decomposed leaves, but the arrangement of rocks was distinctive. Someone had camped here, and recently enough that I could still see the flattened ground where a tent had been pitched. Harper knelt beside the fire ring and brushed away some of the leaves. Underneath, she found something that made her go very still. It was a ranger badge, the old style, tarnished and weathered. She picked it up and turned it over. On the back, engraved in small letters, was a name, J. Morrison. "Morrison," Harper whispered. JM. This was their camp. This is where they stopped before they disappeared. I looked around the campsite, trying to imagine what had happened here. Had Morrison felt the same compulsion we'd felt? Had they tried to leave Station 7, only to find themselves walking in circles, passing the same landmarks over and over until they couldn't tell which direction was real anymore? "We need to keep going," I said, though part of me wanted to stop, to sit down in this abandoned campsite and give up. But I knew if we stopped now, we might never start again. Harper pocketed the badge and stood up. "If we don't make it out," she said quietly, "at least someone will find this someday. Maybe they'll understand what happened here." "We're going to make it out," I said, with more confidence than I felt. We walked for another hour, and the forest began to change again. The trees thinned out, and I could see more sky through the canopy. The oppressive atmosphere started to lift just slightly, and I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. And then I saw it through the trees ahead, a flash of metal, the gate. After 2 hours of hiking, we came to a clearing. And in the middle of that clearing was a familiar rusted gate with a faded sign. Restricted access. Authorized personnel only. We'd reached the trailhead. We were out. Harper let out a sob of relief and ran toward the gate. I followed more slowly, not quite believing what I was seeing. But it was real. Beyond the gate was the access road, and further down I could see Bill's truck parked where he'd left it. Bill was standing next to the truck, and when he saw us emerge from the forest, his face broke into a relieved smile. "There you are," he called out. "I was starting to worry. You're a day late." Harper and I looked at each other. A day late? We'd only been gone 4 days, exactly as planned. "Bill," I said carefully as we approached, "what day is it?" "October 19th, Bill said, checking his watch. "Why? Did you lose track of time out there?" "October 19th. We'd left on October 15th. That meant we'd been in the forest for 4 days. But the logbook entry at Station 7 had been dated October 18th. Yesterday. The math didn't work. We'd spent 2 days hiking to the station, 1 night there, then 2 more days trying to get out. That should have put us at October 19th. But somewhere in that timeline we'd lost a day, or gained one. I couldn't tell anymore. "The patrol," Bill said. How'd it go?" "You get all the documentation I needed?" I pulled out my camera and checked the photos. They were all there, clear and detailed, showing every aspect of Station 7's condition. Professional, thorough work. But as I scrolled through them, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In several of the photos in the background, barely visible in the shadows, there were shapes. Human-shaped shadows that shouldn't have been there. Harper and I had been alone in that cabin. I was certain of it. But the camera had captured something we hadn't seen. I quickly closed the camera viewer before Bill could see. "We got it all," I said, hearing the words come out of my mouth even though I wasn't sure I was the one speaking them. "Good," Bill said. "Any problems? Anything I should know about?" Harper opened her mouth to speak, and I saw the conflict on her face. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to describe the impossible things we'd witnessed. I could see her fighting it, trying to force the words out. Her jaw clenched, her hands balled into fists, and for a moment I thought she might actually do it. But when she spoke, different words came out. Words that sounded like they'd been scripted, rehearsed. "No incidents to report," Harper said flatly. "Station 7 is in poor condition. I'd recommend demolition." The moment she said it, I saw something break in her eyes, a resignation, a defeat. She'd tried to tell the truth and failed, and now she knew that whatever had us wouldn't let us speak freely about it. Bill nodded, satisfied. "All right, let's get you two home. You both look exhausted." We loaded our gear into the truck and climbed in. As Bill drove us away from the trailhead, I looked back at the forest one last time, and I could have sworn I saw smoke rising from somewhere deep in the trees, like someone had just lit a wood stove at a cabin that was supposed to be empty. Harper saw it too. I felt her stiffen beside me, felt her hand grip my arm. But neither of us said anything. We just watched that column of smoke until it disappeared behind the trees. The drive back to the main station took 45 minutes, but it felt like hours. Bill tried to make conversation, asking about the condition of the patrol road and whether we'd seen any wildlife. But Harper and I gave monosyllabic answers. I could see Bill glancing at us in the rearview mirror, concern growing on his face, but he didn't push. When we finally reached the station, Bill parked the truck and turned to face us. "All right," he said. "What really happened out there?" Harper and I looked at each other. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him about the coffee and the logbooks and the voices in the forest. But the words wouldn't come. It was like there was a physical barrier in my throat, preventing me from saying anything true about Station 7. "We're just tired," I managed to say. It was a long patrol, longer than we expected. Bill studied us for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I know when something's not right. You two look like you've been to hell and back. If something happened out there, I need to know." Harper tried again. I could see her struggling, see the effort it took just to form words. "Bill," she said slowly, "have you ever been to Station 7? Bill's expression changed. Something flickered across his face, fear or recognition, or maybe both. "Once," he said quietly. "Long time ago. 2010, I think. Before they shut it down." "Did anything strange happen?" Harper asked. Bill was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't remember much about that trip. Isn't that strange? I can remember every other patrol I've ever done, every station I visited, but Station 7, it's like there's a blank space where those memories should be. All I know is I came back a day late, just like you two, and I couldn't explain where the time went." Harper and I exchanged glances. Bill had experienced it too. Whatever Station 7 was, whatever it did to people, we weren't the first. "Did you try to tell anyone?" I asked. Bill shook his head. Every time I tried, the words came out wrong. I'd mean to say one thing, but what came out was something else entirely. Eventually, I stopped trying. Figured it was just exhaustion, or stress, or something I'd eaten. But I never went back there. And when the state decided to close Station 7, I didn't fight it. I was relieved. He looked at us with something like sympathy in his eyes. "Whatever you experienced out there, you don't have to tell me. Just know that you're not crazy, and you're not alone. That place, it's not right, never has been." Bill got out of the truck and headed into the station building. Harper and I sat in the truck bed for a few more minutes, not moving, just processing what he'd said. "We're not the first," Harper finally said, "and we won't be the last. Unless they demolish it," I said. "If the state follows through on our recommendation." Harper laughed bitterly. "You really think they will? How many reports like ours do you think they've gotten over the years? How many rangers have come back from Station 7 and recommended it be torn down? And yet, it's still standing." She was right. I knew she was right. Station 7 had been there for decades, and it would probably be there for decades more, waiting for the next patrol, the next rangers who didn't know better. "I'm done," Harper said suddenly. "I'm putting in for a transfer. I don't care where, as long as it's nowhere near this place." "Harper," I started, but she cut me off. "Don't try to talk me out of it, Lydia. I can't stay here, not after what we saw, not knowing that place is still out there." I wanted to argue with her, wanted to tell her that running away wouldn't help, that whatever had happened at Station 7 would follow her wherever she went. But I couldn't, because I understood. If I were braver, or smarter, I'd probably do the same thing. Harper climbed out of the truck and grabbed her pack. "I'm going to write everything down," she said. "Everything that happened, before I forget it, or before whatever's in my head starts changing the memories. I'm going to hide it somewhere, leave a record. Maybe someday someone will find it and believe us." "And if they don't?" I asked. Harper shrugged. "Then at least we'll know we tried." She walked away toward the ranger quarters, leaving me alone in the truck. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, thinking about Station 7 and Morrison and all the rangers who'd gone before us. Eventually, I went inside and filed my report. It was exactly what the logbook had predicted. Routine patrol, no incidents, station in poor condition, recommend demolition. My fingers typed the words, but it didn't feel like I was the one writing them. It felt like I was reading from a script, following instructions that had been given to me by something else. When I finished, I saved the file and sent it to Bill. Then I went to my quarters and lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I just lay there listening to the sounds of the station around me and tried not to think about that coffee mug, still steaming after all these years. That was 3 months ago. Harper put in her transfer paperwork the week after we got back. Last I heard, she'd left the Park Service entirely, taken a job with the Forestry Department doing office work in Augusta. She never told anyone what happened at Station 7, and neither did I. My report to Bill was exactly what the logbook had predicted. Routine patrol, no incidents, station in poor condition, recommend demolition. Bill accepted it without question and filed it with the state. As far as anyone knows, the patrol of the old Northern Line was completely uneventful. But I know the truth, and I know that Station 7 is still there, waiting. The state hasn't demolished it yet, probably won't for years, if ever. And every day that passes, I think about that cabin, about the coffee mug and the logbook and the patrol road that doesn't follow any map. I think about the ranger who disappeared in 2011, the one who left that warning in the abandoned pack. I think about what happened to them, whether they're still out there somewhere, lost in a forest that won't let them leave. And I think about what would have happened if Harper and I hadn't completed that log entry, if we'd refused to document the station, if we'd tried to force our way out by sheer will alone. Would we still be out there, wandering in circles on a patrol road that loops back on itself forever? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. I still work at Allagash, still do patrols and maintain trails and help lost hikers. But I stay away from the northern section. I don't go near that old patrol road, and when other rangers ask me about it, I tell them the same thing Bill told me. It's been decommissioned, off limits, nothing to see there. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my cabin, I hear things outside. Footsteps in the forest, voices calling my name, the sound of a pen writing on paper. And sometimes I wake up to find my notebook open on the table, filled with entries I don't remember writing, describing patrols I never went on, incidents I never witnessed. But I never go to check. I just close the notebook, put it away, and try to forget. Because some places don't want to be found. Some places want to stay lost. And Station 7 is one of them. If you're ever in northern Maine, and you see an old rusted gate with a sign about restricted access, do yourself a favor. Keep walking. Don't ask questions. Don't investigate. Just turn around and go back to where you came from, because some patrol routes don't have an end. They just keep going, looping back on themselves, taking you deeper and deeper into a forest that doesn't follow normal rules. And once you're in, once you've seen what's waiting at Station 7, you might make it out. Your body might leave those woods, but part of you will stay there forever, trapped in a loop, writing entries in a logbook that describes a patrol that never ends. I know because I can still taste that coffee sometimes, even though I never drank it. I can still feel the weight of that pen in my hand, even though I put it down months ago. And when I close my eyes, I can still see that cabin, that table, that steaming mug, waiting for the next ranger who doesn't listen to warnings, waiting for the next patrol, waiting to start the loop all over again. I'm a park ranger, and I've spent the last 6 years working at the Devonig Skoneig Lakes wilderness area in northern Maine. It's one of those places that most people have never heard of, a sprawl of pristine lakes and old-growth forest tucked away in the heart of the North Woods. We get maybe a few hundred visitors a year, mostly serious hikers and canoeists who know what they're getting into. It's remote, it's quiet, and most days, that's exactly what I love about it. My name's Iris Flynn, and I came to this job through a somewhat unusual route. I started out as an ornithologist, spent my early 20s traveling to bird sanctuaries and conservation sites, documenting species and studying migration patterns. But after a while, the constant travel wore on me, and I wanted something more stable. When I saw the posting for a ranger position at Devonig Skoneig, with a focus on wildlife monitoring, it felt like the perfect fit. The job is everything I hoped it would be. I spend my days hiking through pristine wilderness, documenting bird populations, maintaining trails, and helping the occasional lost hiker find their way back to civilization. I live in a small cabin about 2 miles from the nearest road, and most nights, the only sounds I hear are owls and the wind through the pines. It's solitary work, but I've never minded being alone. At least, I didn't used to mind. What I'm about to tell you happened last September, during what should have been a routine monitoring trip to one of the more remote lakes in our jurisdiction. We call it Silence Lake, though that's not its official name. The official name is Devonig Skoneig Deadwater, but everyone who works in the area calls it Silence Lake because of how unnaturally quiet it is. There's something about the way the lake sits in its basin, surrounded by dense forest on all sides, that seems to swallow sound. Birds don't call there as much as they do at other lakes. The water barely makes a sound when it laps against the shore. Even your footsteps seem muffled. I'd been to Silence Lake dozens of times before. It was part of my regular monitoring route, a place I'd visit every few weeks to check on loon populations and document any changes in the ecosystem. I'd never had any problems there, never felt uncomfortable or uneasy. It was just another lake, albeit an unusually quiet one. But that September trip was different. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was scheduled to spend 3 days at Silence Lake, conducting a comprehensive bird survey before the migration season really kicked into gear. I'd be camping alone, which wasn't unusual. Most of my monitoring trips were solo affairs. The only other ranger working our section was Graham Tate, and he was scheduled to be checking trails on the western side of the wilderness area, a good 15 miles from where I'd be. Graham and I got along well enough, though we didn't socialize much. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of guy who did his job efficiently and didn't waste words. He'd been working at Devonig Skoneig for almost 10 years, longer than anyone else on staff, and he knew the area better than the back of his hand. If I ever needed advice about a tricky trail section or a problem bear, Graham was the person I'd ask. The morning I left for Silence Lake, Graham was at the ranger station when I arrived to check out my equipment. He was sitting at one of the desks, reviewing a map, and he looked up when I came in. "Heading to Silence Lake?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, signing out a satellite phone and a portable weather radio. 3-day bird survey should be pretty straightforward. Graham nodded, but there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "You been out there recently?" "About 3 weeks ago," I said. "Why?" "I was up that way last month," Graham said slowly. "Noticed something strange about the acoustics. Sound wasn't carrying right. Thought maybe it was just me, but..." He trailed off, shrugging. "Sound wasn't carrying right?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "Hard to explain," Graham said. "Like when you call out and there's no echo, even though there should be one. Or when you can hear something clearly from a mile away, but can't hear your own footsteps. Probably nothing. Could have just been weather conditions." I thought about that. Acoustics in wilderness areas could be weird, affected by temperature inversions, humidity, all sorts of factors. But Graham didn't seem like the type to mention something unless it had really bothered him. "I'll keep an ear out," I said, trying to make a joke of it. Graham didn't smile. "Yeah, you do that. And Iris, check in on schedule. Don't let your radio batteries die." It was an odd thing to emphasize, but I promised I would. Then I loaded my gear into my truck and headed north toward the trailhead. The hike to Silence Lake took about 4 hours, following an old logging road that had been reclaimed by forest decades ago. It was a beautiful September day, cool and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes everything look sharper, more defined. I made good time, stopping occasionally to document birds I saw along the way. A pair of pileated woodpeckers, a family of chickadees, the usual late-season species. I reached the lake around 2 in the afternoon. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The shoreline was rocky in most places, with a few small beaches of gray sand scattered here and there. I made camp on a flat area near the northern shore, in a spot I'd used several times before. There was a fire ring already there, though it looked like nobody had used it in months. After setting up my tent and organizing my gear, I pulled out my recording equipment. I use audio recorders for a lot of my bird monitoring work, setting up devices in different locations to capture bird calls over extended periods. It's more efficient than trying to identify every bird visually, and it gives me data I can analyze later. I had 3 recorders with me, small digital devices that could record continuously for up to 48 hours. I set up the first one near my campsite, mounting it on a tree about 6 feet off the ground. The second one I placed on the eastern shore, about half a mile from camp. The third I saved for later, planning to set it up on the western shore the next day. By the time I'd finished setting up the recorders, it was close to 5 o'clock. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, and the temperature was dropping. I decided to do a quick survey of the immediate area before it got dark, documenting any birds I could see or hear. That's when I first noticed how quiet it was. I mean, I knew Silence Lake was quiet. That was normal. But this was different. This was a complete absence of sound, like someone had wrapped the entire lake in cotton. I stopped walking and just stood there listening. I couldn't hear anything, no birds, no insects, not even the wind. The lake surface was completely still, not a single ripple disturbing its mirror-like perfection. I told myself it was just a calm evening, that there was nothing strange about a moment of quiet in the wilderness. But something about it felt wrong. It felt unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. I pulled out my handheld recorder, the one I use for making quick audio notes, and hit record. September 17th, 5:47 p.m., I said, speaking clearly into the microphone. Arriving at Silence Lake for 3-day bird survey. Initial observations, unusually quiet conditions. No bird calls detected in the past 15 minutes. Wind is calm. Temperature approximately 55 degrees. As I spoke, I noticed something odd. My voice sounded strange, flat, and echoless, like I was speaking in a heavily insulated room rather than open air. I said a few more words, testing it, and the effect persisted. There should have been some slight echo from the trees, some reverberation, but there was nothing. I thought about what Graham had said that morning. Sound wasn't carrying right. I finished my audio note and continued walking along the shore. I was heading toward a small rocky outcrop that jutted into the water, a spot I knew was popular with herons. As I walked, I kept my recorder running, documenting everything I saw. That's when the wind stopped. I don't mean it died down gradually. I mean it stopped, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment there was a gentle breeze rustling through the pines, and the next moment, nothing. Complete, absolute stillness. And in that stillness I saw the wave. It started about 50 yards from shore, a subtle disturbance on the water's surface, a single ripple, moving slowly towards the beach. But there was no wind to create it. No boat, no animal, nothing that could explain why the water was moving. I stopped walking and watched as the ripple grew larger, became a wave, a gentle swell, maybe 6 inches high. It moved with perfect symmetry, spreading out in a circle like someone had dropped a massive stone in the center of the lake. But I hadn't seen anything fall. The water had just started moving. The wave reached the shore and lapped quietly against the rocks, and then another wave followed it. And another, a series of concentric circles all emanating from the same central point in the middle of the lake, all moving with that same slow, deliberate rhythm. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, watching the waves come in, one after another. My scientific mind tried to find an explanation. Underwater spring? Seismic activity? Some kind of pressure wave from a temperature change? None of it made sense. The waves were too regular, too perfect. Eventually, the waves stopped. The lake went still again, and the wind came back just as suddenly as it had left, rustling through the trees like nothing had happened. I looked down at my recorder and realized I'd been holding it the entire time. I rewound it slightly and played back the last few minutes. My voice came through clearly, describing what I was seeing. Unusual wave pattern on the lake's surface, no apparent source. Wind has stopped completely. And then, underneath my voice, barely audible, I heard something else. Another voice. It was saying the same words I was saying, in perfect unison with me, but it wasn't quite the same. The tone was slightly different, the rhythm just a fraction off. It was my voice, but also not my voice. I stopped the playback, my hands suddenly shaking. I rewound it again and listened more carefully. Yes, there it was. Two voices speaking at the same time, overlapping perfectly but not quite synchronized. Like a delay of maybe 1/10 of a second, just enough to create that unsettling doubled effect. I checked the recorder. Single microphone input, no issues with the hardware. There was no technical reason for my voice to be doubling like that. I played it back one more time, and this time I heard something else. In the background, beneath both versions of my voice, there was a sound. Low and rhythmic, almost like breathing. But it was too slow to be human breathing, too regular. It sounded mechanical, artificial. I turned off the recorder and stood there on the shore, watching the lake. The sun was setting now, painting the water in shades of orange and red. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I walked back to my campsite, my mind racing. I needed to think rationally about this. The wave could have a natural explanation, even if I couldn't think of one right now. And the doubled voice on the recording, that could be an audio artifact, some kind of digital glitch. Maybe my recorder was malfunctioning, but I didn't believe it. Not really. Because I could still feel it. That wrongness in the air, that sense that the lake was watching me. I built a fire as the darkness fell, more for the comfort of the light than for warmth. The temperature had dropped significantly, but it wasn't cold enough to really need a fire. I just wanted something normal, something predictable. Fire was fire. It crackled and popped and gave off heat and light, exactly as it should. I made dinner, a simple meal of freeze-dried pasta that I heated over the fire. As I ate, I listened to the forest around me. The quiet wasn't as oppressive now. I could hear the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Normal night sounds. But every now and then, the sounds would stop. Just for a few seconds, maybe 5 or 10, and in those moments the silence was absolute. And in that silence, I'd hear something else. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of sound. A pressure in my ears like diving underwater. I pulled out my satellite phone and considered calling Graham. But what would I say? That I'd seen some unexplained waves and my audio recorder was acting weird? He'd probably tell me to get some sleep and check my equipment in the morning. Instead, I pulled out my handheld recorder again and hit record. September 17th, 9:32 p.m., I said. Back at camp. Documenting unusual acoustic phenomena observed this evening. Primary observation. Complete cessation of ambient sound at irregular intervals, lasting approximately 5 to 10 seconds each time. Secondary observation. Audio recording from earlier shows doubled voice track with no apparent source. I paused, listening. The forest had gone quiet again. I waited, counting in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. But there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows and the dying light of my campfire. "Hello?" I called out. My voice was steady, controlled, even though I felt anything but calm. No response. The forest stayed quiet. I added more wood to the fire, building it up until the flames were casting light 20 feet in every direction. Then I sat with my back to a large boulder, my bear spray in one hand and my flashlight in the other, and I waited. The night passed slowly. I didn't sleep, didn't even try to. I just sat there by the fire, feeding it logs, listening to the forest. Every sound made me jump. Every period of silence made my skin crawl. But nothing happened. No more strange waves, no more doubled voices. Just a long, uncomfortable night of waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Daylight made everything seem more rational, more manageable. I was exhausted, running on no sleep and too much adrenaline, but at least I could see clearly now. I made coffee and forced myself to eat a breakfast bar, even though I wasn't hungry. Then I pulled out my handheld recorder to review what I'd recorded the night before. The playback started normally, my voice, documenting the acoustic phenomena. But then, at the point where the forest had gone quiet and the branch had snapped, the recording changed. The silence on the recording was there, perfect and complete, but it lasted longer than I remembered. I'd counted to 5 in my head, maybe 10 seconds at most. But on the recording, the silence went on for almost a minute. A full minute of absolutely nothing, not even the sound of my breathing or the crackle of the fire. And then, at the end of that silence, right before the branch snapped, I heard something. A voice. My voice. It was saying, "Don't look behind you." But I hadn't said that. I was certain I hadn't said that. I'd called out "hello" when the branch snapped. That's what I remembered. But on the recording, clear as day, was my voice saying, "Don't look behind you." I played it back 3 more times, checking, making absolutely sure I wasn't misheating. But no, it was there. My voice, saying words I hadn't spoken, in the middle of a silence that had lasted far longer than I'd experienced. I felt cold despite the morning sun. Something was very wrong with this place, with this lake. And whatever it was affecting not just what I heard, but what my equipment recorded. Or maybe it was affecting my memory of what had happened. I couldn't tell anymore which was worse. I needed to talk to Graham. I needed to get another perspective on this. Needed to know if I was losing my mind or if there was something genuinely wrong with Silence Lake. I pulled out my satellite phone and dialed the ranger station. It rang 4 times before Graham picked up. "Tate," he said, his voice crackling slightly through the connection. "Graham, it's Iris," I said. "I'm at Silence Lake. I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause. "Everything okay? You sound stressed." "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. "But I'm experiencing some of what you mentioned. The acoustic problems. It's worse than you described." Another pause. "How much worse?" "I've got audio recordings that don't match my memory of what happened," I said. "I've got my voice saying things I don't remember saying. And last night, there were periods where all sound just stopped completely. For what felt like a few seconds but recorded as a full minute." The line was quiet for so long I thought we'd lost connection. Then Graham said, "Iris, I need you to listen carefully. I didn't want to say this in front of the superintendent, but there's a reason I mentioned the acoustics to you. 3 years ago, we had a ranger stationed at Silence Lake for a week-long survey. Name was Patrick Morrison. When he came back, he wasn't the same. He kept insisting that things had happened that weren't in his reports, that he'd heard and seen things that didn't match his recordings." I felt my stomach tighten. What happened to him? "He quit 2 weeks later," Graham said. "Said he couldn't trust his own senses anymore. Last I heard, he was working as a park interpreter down in Massachusetts. Nothing too demanding. But Iris, he was a solid ranger. 10 years of experience. And that place broke him." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Because it sounds crazy," Graham said. "And because I hoped maybe it was just him, just some kind of breakdown. But if you're experiencing the same things, I can't leave," I said. "I'm scheduled for 3 days. I've already set up the recorders. I need to complete the survey." "No, you don't," Graham said firmly. "You can pack up right now and hike back. I'll clear it with the superintendent. This isn't worth your mental health." Part of me wanted to take him up on that offer. But another part, the stubborn part that had gotten me through graduate school and countless field research projects, refused to give up. "I'm staying," I said, "but I'm documenting everything. Every weird thing that happens, I'm recording it. If something's wrong with this place, we need to know what it is." Graham sighed. "All right, but you check in every 6 hours, and if things get worse, if you start feeling unsafe or confused, you call me immediately and you get out. Understood?" "Understood," I said. "And Iris," Graham's voice softened slightly, "don't listen to the recordings too much. I think that's part of what got to Morrison. He kept playing them back, kept trying to make sense of them, and it just made things worse. Do your observations, make your notes, but don't obsess over the audio files." I promised him I wouldn't, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Then I ended the call and sat there by my dying campfire, staring out at the lake. It looked peaceful in the morning light, beautiful even. The water was a deep blue-green, the surrounding forest lush and healthy. There was no sign of anything wrong, but I knew better now. Silence Lake was keeping secrets, and despite every instinct telling me to leave, I needed to know what they were. I spent the rest of the morning trying to maintain some semblance of routine. I checked the audio recorder I'd set up near camp, downloading the overnight files onto my laptop. I did a perimeter survey of the immediate area, documenting any bird species I saw or heard. I even forced myself to eat lunch, though my appetite had completely vanished. The forest seemed normal during daylight hours. I heard chickadees and nuthatches, saw a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. The wind moved through the trees in a perfectly ordinary way, creating that familiar rustling whisper. If I didn't think too hard about the previous night, if I focused just on the immediate moment, I could almost convince myself that everything was fine. But then I made the mistake of listening to the overnight recordings. I set up my laptop at the campsite, connected my headphones, and started the playback. The first few hours were exactly what I expected. The normal sounds of a forest at night. Owls calling, small mammals rustling through underbrush, the occasional splash of something entering the water. Standard wilderness audio. But around 2 a.m., things changed. The ambient sounds began to fade, like someone was slowly turning down a volume knob. Within the span of maybe 30 seconds, the recording went from normal forest noise to complete silence. And I mean complete. The audio display on my laptop showed a flat line, 0 input, as if the microphone had stopped working entirely. The silence lasted for 3 minutes and 47 seconds. I watched the timestamp tick by, watched that flat line extend across my screen, and then, right at the end of those 3 minutes, something appeared in the recording. It was a voice. My voice, speaking clearly into the silence. "I'm standing by the lake. The water is moving again. I should go closer. I should see what's causing it." The recording cut off abruptly after that, and the normal forest sounds resumed as if nothing had happened. I sat there staring at my laptop, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. I had been in my tent at 2 a.m. I had been awake, yes, but I hadn't gotten up. I certainly hadn't walked to the lake. I would remember doing that. Wouldn't I? I tried to recall exactly what I'd been doing at that time. I remembered lying in my sleeping bag, listening to the forest, feeling uncomfortable and unable to sleep. But the details were fuzzy. Had I gotten up? Had I walked to the water? The more I tried to remember, the less certain I became. I checked the second recorder, the one I'd placed on the eastern shore. The file was similar, normal sounds, then that same 3-minute, 47-second period of silence, then a resumption of normal audio. But this recording didn't have my voice on it, just silence. followed by what sounded like a single splash, and then normal sounds again. I pulled out my notebook and tried to write down everything I could remember about the previous night. Timestamps, observations, my emotional state. But as I wrote, I noticed something disturbing. My handwriting kept changing. Some sentences were in my normal script, neat and controlled, but other sentences were messier, more hurried, like I'd been writing quickly or under stress, and I had no memory of writing the hurried parts. One section, written in that rushed handwriting, said, "The lake wants me to come closer. I can feel it pulling at me, but I know if I go, I won't come back the same." I didn't remember writing that. I stared at it, trying to convince myself it was a forgery, that someone else had written in my notebook. But it was my handwriting, even if it was a stressed version of it. And who else could have written it? I was alone out here. I flipped through more pages of my notebook looking for other anomalies. And I found them, scattered throughout my field notes from the past several months. There were entries I didn't remember making. Brief observations about Silence Lake that seemed out of place among my bird surveys. July 12th. Why do I keep coming back here? There are better survey sites. August 3rd. The quiet is different today. It's not peaceful. It's waiting. August 19th. I heard something beneath the normal recordings. Need to analyze them more carefully. These entries were in my handwriting, dated and detailed, but I had no memory of writing them. Had I been concerned about Silence Lake for months without consciously realizing it? Or was this something else, some part of my mind that had been operating independently, noticing things my conscious mind refused to acknowledge? I closed the notebook and stood up, needing to move, needing to do something physical to shake off the growing sense of dread. I decided to hike to the western shore and set up my third recorder. It was work, it was productive, and it would keep my mind occupied. The hike took about 45 minutes, following a rough trail that skirted the southern edge of the lake. The forest was dense here, mostly old-growth pine with a thick understory of ferns. It should have felt primeval and majestic, but instead it felt oppressive, like the trees were closing in around me. I reached the western shore around 2 p.m. This side of the lake was rockier, with steep granite outcrops rising directly from the water. I found a good spot for the recorder, a sheltered area under an overhang where the device would be protected from weather. As I was setting it up, I heard something that made me freeze. It was singing. Human singing, distant and faint, but unmistakably human. A woman's voice, singing something that sounded almost like a lullaby. I turned slowly, scanning the forest, but I couldn't see anyone. The singing continued, seeming to come from deeper in the woods, away from the lake. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped abruptly. The forest went quiet. And then I heard footsteps, moving quickly through the underbrush, heading away from me. I didn't follow. Every instinct told me to stay exactly where I was, to finish setting up the recorder and get back to camp. But curiosity won out. I left the recorder half installed and moved carefully in the direction I'd heard the footsteps. The trail, such as it was, led deeper into the forest. After maybe 100 yards, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a campsite, or rather, the remains of one. There was a fire ring, a flat area where a tent had clearly been pitched, and various pieces of debris scattered around. Old debris, weathered and partly buried in leaves. A rusted pot, a torn piece of canvas, a boot so rotted it had practically dissolved into the forest floor. But what really caught my attention was the tree. Someone had carved words into the bark of a large pine tree at the edge of the campsite. The carving was old, the letters partly grown over with new bark, but still legible. "The lake speaks but lies." Below that, in what looked like different handwriting, "Don't trust the recordings." And below that, in a third hand, "I hear myself, but it isn't me." I felt ice run down my spine. These carvings were old, maybe decades old based on the tree growth. How many people had camped here? How many had experienced what I was experiencing? I moved closer to the tree, examining the carvings more carefully. There were more higher up on the trunk, some so overgrown they were barely visible. I could make out fragments. Days lost. Water changes. Patrick Morrison, 2011. Patrick Morrison, I knew that name. Graham had mentioned it on the phone. The ranger who'd had a breakdown after staying at Silence Lake, who couldn't trust his own perceptions anymore. I pulled out my camera and photographed the tree from multiple angles, making sure I captured every carving, every fragment of text. Then I searched the rest of the campsite, looking for anything else that might give me information. Near the remains of the fire ring, I found something half buried in the soil. I brushed away the dirt and pine needles and uncovered a small metal case, badly corroded but still intact. Inside was a laminated card, the kind rangers use for emergency contact information. The card was water-damaged and faded, but I could still read the name, Patrick Morrison. And beneath his name, in handwritten ink that had mostly bled away, was a single sentence. If found, destroy all recordings. My hands were shaking as I held the card. Patrick Morrison had been here at this exact campsite. He'd experienced what I was experiencing, and his advice, his warning to whoever found this, was to destroy all recordings. But why? What was on those recordings that was so dangerous? I thought about my own audio files, the doubled voice, the things I'd apparently said but didn't remember saying. What if listening to them was part of the problem? What if the act of playing them back somehow reinforced whatever was happening, made it worse? I pulled out my handheld recorder and looked at it. 3 days of audio data. Hours and hours of recordings capturing everything that had happened at Silence Lake. Evidence of the anomalies, proof that something was wrong. But also, potentially, something that was affecting my mind. Morrison had said to destroy them, and he'd had 10 years of experience. He'd known what he was talking about. I made a decision. I would keep the recordings for now, but I wouldn't listen to them anymore. Not until I was out of here, back at the ranger station where Graham could be present, where I'd have other people to help me evaluate what was real and what wasn't. I pocketed Morrison's emergency card and continued searching the campsite. I found a few more rusted items, nothing identifiable. No names, no dates, nothing concrete except for Morrison's card and the carvings on the tree. As I was searching, I heard the singing again. Closer this time, right behind me. I spun around, and for just a second, I saw her. A woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She was wearing outdoor gear that looked decades out of date, and her face was pale, almost translucent in the dappled forest light. She was looking at me, her mouth moving, singing that same lullaby. But no sound was coming from her mouth. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and her expression was one of desperate urgency, like she was trying to warn me of something. I blinked, and she was gone. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaking now. "I can help you if you're lost. Please say something." Nothing. The forest had gone quiet again. That same unnatural silence I'd experienced the night before. I backed away from the clearing, my heart pounding. I needed to get back to my campsite, needed to call Graham, needed to get some kind of grounding in reality. Because what I'd just seen, that couldn't have been real. Couldn't have been. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something else carved into the tree, much lower down, almost at ground level. The carving was fresher than the others, the bark still showing raw wood underneath. And the handwriting looked familiar. It looked like mine. The carving said, "Iris Flynn was here." She tried to warn herself, but she didn't listen. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. I hadn't carved that. I would remember carving my own name into a tree. But there it was, in letters that matched my handwriting, in a carving that couldn't be more than a few days old based on the fresh wood. Had I been here before? During one of my missing time periods? Had some part of me carved that message, trying to communicate with my conscious self? I practically ran back to where I'd left the recorder, finished setting it up with shaking hands, and then hiked back to my camp as fast as I could manage. By the time I got there, I was out of breath and close to panic. I pulled out my satellite phone and called Graham. He answered on the first ring. "Iris, what's wrong? What's wrong?" "I found something," I said, the words tumbling out. An old campsite on the western shore. Someone carved warnings into a tree. Multiple people, I think, over the years. And Graham, I saw someone, a woman, but she disappeared, just vanished. Graham was quiet for a moment. What did the warning say? I told him about the carvings. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Iris, that campsite. I think I know where that is. We found it years ago, back when I first started working here. The superintendent at the time said it dated back to the 1970s, maybe earlier. Some kind of unofficial camping spot before the area became protected wilderness. But the warnings," I said. "The lake speaks but lies. Don't trust the recordings. Other people experience this." "I know," Graham said quietly. "Patrick Morrison found that tree too. That's when things started getting really bad for him. He became obsessed with figuring out who'd carved those messages, spent hours researching old park records. But there was nothing. No documentation, no names, just those carvings." "What about the woman I saw?" I asked. "Could there be someone else out here?" "Not officially," Graham said. "But Iris, I need you to think carefully about what you saw. Are you absolutely certain she was there? Real, solid, physical?" I thought about it. The woman had looked translucent, almost ghostly, and she'd disappeared so completely, so instantly. "I don't know," I admitted. "It happened so fast, but I saw her, Graham, or I saw something." "I think you need to come back," Graham said. "Right now. We can schedule another survey later, with 2 people, proper support. But you shouldn't be alone out there." He was right, I knew he was right, but something stopped me from agreeing immediately. It was that same stubborn part of me that had insisted I stay in the first place. I needed to understand this. I needed to know what was happening at Silence Lake. "One more night," I said. "I'll stay through tonight, document what happens, and then I'll hike out tomorrow morning. That's 24 hours. I can handle 24 more hours. Iris, one more night," I repeated firmly. "And I'll check in every 2 hours. If I miss a check-in, you come get me, but I need to finish this." Graham was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Fine. Every 2 hours. And I'm serious, Iris. You miss one check-in and I'm hiking in. I'll bring support if I have to, but I'm coming to get you." "Understood," I said. "Thank you, Graham." After I hung up, I sat at my campsite and tried to think rationally about everything that had happened. The recordings that didn't match reality, the handwriting in my notebook I didn't remember writing, the woman who may or may not have been there, the carved warnings on the tree. There had to be an explanation, something environmental, maybe. Some kind of natural phenomenon that affected perception and memory. Perhaps there was something in the water, a toxin or algae bloom that caused hallucinations. Or maybe it was infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that could affect human psychology without being consciously perceived. I pulled out my laptop and started making notes, trying to approach this like a research problem rather than a personal crisis. I documented every anomaly I'd experienced, every weird recording, every moment of missing time or confused memory. If there was a pattern, I'd find it. As I worked, the afternoon faded into evening. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting the lake in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful, objectively beautiful, and for a moment I allowed myself to just appreciate it. That's when I noticed something wrong with my laptop screen. The document I'd been working on, my detailed notes about the anomalies, had changed. Paragraphs I'd written were reordered. Sentences were different, words altered. And at the bottom of the document, in a section I definitely hadn't written, was a message. You hear what the lake wants you to hear. You remember what the lake wants you to remember. Stop fighting it. Just listen. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I hadn't written that. I would never write something like that. But it was in my document, in my handwriting font, formatted exactly like my other notes. I checked the file history. According to the metadata, the last edit had been made 2 minutes ago. By me, on this laptop. But I hadn't touched the keyboard in at least 5 minutes. I'd been looking at the lake. I slammed the laptop shut and stood up, my breathing rapid and shallow. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. And I needed to get out. Tomorrow morning couldn't come soon enough. I built up my fire until it was roaring, creating a circle of light that pushed back the growing darkness. Then I set up my tent right next to the fire, close enough to feel the heat, and I gathered every light source I had, flashlights, headlamps, even a small lantern, and arranged them around my campsite. I wasn't going to let the darkness take me. Whatever was happening here, whatever was playing with my perceptions and my memories, it seemed stronger at night. So I'd fill the night with light, and I'd stay awake, and I'd document everything. The first check-in with Graham came at 7 p.m. I told him I was fine, that I'd secured camp and was staying alert. He sounded worried, but didn't push me to leave. The second check-in was at 9 p.m. Still fine. Fire going strong, plenty of light, no issues. The third check-in should have been at 11 p.m. I don't remember making it. I woke up on the shore of the lake. It was still dark, the middle of the night, and I was lying on my stomach on the rocky beach about 20 yards from my campsite. My clothes were soaked, like I'd been partially in the water. My hands were covered in mud, and there were small cuts on my palms from the rocks. I sat up slowly, disoriented and terrified. I had no memory of leaving my tent, no memory of walking to the water. The last thing I remembered clearly was sitting by the fire around 10 p.m., preparing for my next check-in with Graham. I looked back at my campsite. The fire was still burning, though it had burned down significantly. My tent was exactly as I'd left it, the flap open. All my lights were still on. Everything looked normal, except that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I stood up on shaking legs and made my way back to camp. My satellite phone was sitting on the ground near the fire, the screen showing 3 missed calls, all from Graham. The timestamp on the last call was 11:23 p.m. I'd missed my check-in, and I had no idea what time it was now. I grabbed the phone and checked. 2:47 a.m. I'd lost almost 4 hours. With trembling hands, I dialed Graham. He answered before the first ring finished. "Iris, Jesus Christ, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I woke up on the shore. I don't remember getting there. What time did you call?" 11 p.m. like we agreed, and then every 15 minutes after that when you didn't answer. "Iris, I'm getting my gear together. I'm coming to get you." "No," I said, though I wasn't sure why I was arguing. "I'm okay. I'm back at camp. I'm safe. You blacked out for 4 hours. Graham's voice was sharp with worry. You're not safe. Whatever's happening there, it's affecting you. You need to leave now. Don't wait for morning. Pack your essentials and start hiking. I'll meet you on the trail. He was right. I knew he was right. But as I looked out at the lake, still as glass in the darkness, I felt something pulling at me. A compulsion, a need to stay, to see this through. Iris? Graham's voice cut through my thoughts. Are you still there? Yeah, I said. I'm here. Listen, give me until dawn. I'll pack up and hike out at first light. That's only a few hours. I can stay awake until then. I don't like this, Graham said. But if you're not on the trail by 6 a.m., I'm coming in, and I'm bringing the superintendent with me. We'll physically drag you out if we have to. I'll be on the trail by 6, I promised. I just need to collect my equipment first. The recorders are still out there. Forget the recorders, Graham said flatly. They're not worth your life. But they were worth something. They had recorded what happened during my missing hours. If I was going to understand what happened to me, I needed those recordings. After I hung up with Graham, I forced myself to check my handheld recorder. I'd left it running all evening, hoping to capture any anomalies. The file was still there, still recording. I rewound it to around 10:30 p.m. and hit play. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. I could hear myself moving around the campsite, the crackle of the fire, the usual forest sounds. Then, at 10:47 p.m., my voice appeared on the recording. The lake is calling me. I need to go to the water. I need to see what it wants to show me. My voice was flat, emotionless, like I was reading from a script, and I had no memory of saying those words. The recording continued. I could hear my footsteps moving away from the fire toward the lake, the sound of rocks crunching under my boots. And then, when the footsteps stopped, there was a new sound, splashing, like I was wading into the water. I can see them now, my voice said on the recording. All the others who came before. They're standing in the water, waiting. They want me to join them. My blood ran cold. I didn't remember any of this. I didn't remember seeing anyone in the water. Didn't remember saying those words. The recording went quiet for a long moment. Just the gentle lap of water and my own breathing, then my voice again, but different this time, uncertain, confused. Where am I? Why am I wet? I need to get back to camp. The sound of splashing again, footsteps on rocks, heavy breathing. And then nothing. Just the ambient sounds of the forest until I heard myself moving around camp, looking for my phone. I played the recording back 3 more times, trying to find some explanation. But there wasn't one. I'd been sleepwalking, or something like sleepwalking. I'd gone to the lake, waded into the water, and said things I didn't remember. And worse, I'd seen things. People in the water. Others who came before. Were they real? Or was it a hallucination, some kind of waking dream? I checked my other equipment. My laptop was still on, the document with my notes still open. But there were new additions. Paragraphs I didn't remember writing, observations about figures in the water, and voices calling from beneath the surface. The writing was mine, the style was mine, but the content was alien. According to the document metadata, I'd been actively editing it between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. During the time I had no memory of. I was losing time, or more accurately, some part of me was continuing to function during that lost time, walking around, recording observations, typing notes. But I had no conscious awareness of it, no memory of those actions. Graham had been right. I needed to leave, now. I started packing frantically, throwing gear into my backpack without any organization. Tent. sleeping bag, essential equipment. I'd come back for the recorders later, or more likely I'd just abandon them. They weren't important anymore. As I was packing, I heard something that made me stop. Singing. That same lullaby I'd heard on the western shore. But now it was coming from the lake itself, drifting across the water. I turned slowly and looked at the lake. The surface was disturbed now, ripples spreading out from multiple points. And in those ripples I could see shapes. Dark figures barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, standing in the water about 50 yards from shore. There were 5 of them, or maybe 6. It was hard to tell in the dark. They were just standing there motionless, their forms barely distinguishable from the water itself. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it at the lake. The beam cut across the water, illuminating the figures clearly for just a moment. They weren't people. They were something else. Human-shaped, but wrong. Too thin, too tall, their limbs bent at angles that didn't make anatomical sense. And their faces, God, their faces were blank. No features, no eyes or mouths, just smooth surfaces where faces should have been. I blinked and they were gone. The water was still. The singing had stopped. I stood there, my flashlight still pointed at the lake, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Had I really seen that? Or was it another hallucination, another trick of this place? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my pack, left everything else, and started hiking. It was still dark, maybe an hour before dawn, but I couldn't stay at that lake for another second. The trail was treacherous in the darkness, forcing me to go slowly despite my desperate need to move fast. I used my flashlight to navigate, following the old logging road back toward the trailhead. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like it might be one of those figures from the lake. After about an hour of hiking, the sky began to lighten. Dawn was coming, painting the eastern horizon in shades of gray and pink. I'd made it through the night. I was going to get out. That's when I realized I'd been walking in a circle. I was back at Silence Lake. My campsite was directly ahead of me, the fire long since burned out, my abandoned equipment scattered around. I checked my GPS. According to the device, I'd hiked 3 miles south, away from the lake. But somehow I was right back where I'd started. I tried again, heading in what the GPS said was south. I walked for another hour, carefully following the trail markers I remembered from the hike in. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how carefully I navigated, I kept ending up back at the lake. It was impossible. The trail didn't loop. There was no geographic feature that would cause me to circle back. But somehow, every path I took led me right back to my starting point. By the 3rd attempt, full daylight had arrived. It was after 7 a.m. I'd missed my deadline with Graham. He'd be coming for me soon. I sat down on the shore, exhausted and terrified, and tried to think rationally. The lake was somehow keeping me here, whether through some environmental effect that disrupted navigation, or through affecting my perception and memory so I couldn't find my way out. I was trapped. I pulled out my satellite phone and called Graham. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail again. I tried the ranger station's main line. No answer. Either I was out of range, which didn't make sense because I'd had perfect signal just hours ago, or something was blocking the calls. I was alone, completely alone, at a lake that wouldn't let me leave. I must have sat there for hours, trying different directions, making call after call, all of them failing. The sun moved across the sky. Noon came and went. Afternoon faded into evening. And then, as the sun began to set again, I heard Graham's voice. "Iris, where are you?" It was coming from the forest, from the direction of the trail. Relief flooded through me. Graham had come. He'd found me. "I'm here," I shouted. Standing up and waving my arms, I'm at the lake! I heard footsteps approaching, and then Graham emerged from the trees. He was wearing his ranger gear, a pack on his back, and he looked worried. Jesus, Iris, we've been searching for hours. Why didn't you answer your phone? I tried calling, I said. It wouldn't go through. And Graham, something's wrong with this place. I tried to leave, but I kept ending up back here. The trail won't let me out. Graham looked at me with concern. Okay, we're going to get you out of here. Come on, I know the way. He turned and started walking back towards the trees. I followed, relief making me almost giddy. I was getting out, finally getting out. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, Graham leading confidently, me following close behind. Then he stopped and turned to face a large pine tree. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at it. "Graham?" I said. "What's wrong? Why are we stopping?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and touched the tree trunk, running his fingers over the bark. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were carvings on this tree, too. Fresh ones. And they were forming as I watched, letters appearing in the bark as if an invisible knife was cutting them. The letters spelled out, "She thinks I'm Graham." I took a step back. "You're not Graham." The thing that looked like Graham turned to face me, and his expression was wrong. His smile was too wide, his eyes too focused. "No," he said in Graham's voice, "but you needed me to be Graham, so that's what the lake showed you." "What are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I'm what's left," he said, "of everyone who drank from this water. We're all here, Iris, all mixed together. Morrison and the woman you saw singing, and dozens of others going back decades. The lake collected us, made us part of itself, and now it's collecting you." The figure that looked like Graham tilted its head, studying me. "But you're fighting harder than most. You're trying to understand instead of just surrendering. That's good. That means you might be able to help others, like we tried to help you. Leave warnings, carve messages, hide recordings with the truth." "I don't want to be part of this," I said, backing away. "I want to leave." "You can't leave," Not Graham said gently. "Not anymore. You drank the water on your first day here. It's been inside you for 3 days now, changing your neurons, altering your perceptions. Even if you physically left this place, you'd still be connected to it. You'd hear us calling, and eventually, you'd come back." I thought about Patrick Morrison, how he'd left Silence Lake but couldn't trust his own perceptions anymore. How he'd quit the ranger service, taken a job far away, but had never really escaped. Was that my future? Living in constant doubt, never sure what was real? "There has to be a way," I said desperately. "Some way to reverse it, to flush it out of my system." Not Graham shook his head. "We tried everything. Filters, purification, medication, nothing worked. Once the lake is inside you, it's there forever. The only choice you have is how you deal with it." The figure started to dissolve, its edges becoming translucent. "Morrison chose to run, to hide from it. That's why he's suffering. But others, like the woman you saw, they chose to stay, to become guardians, to warn people away." "Is she still here?" I asked. "The woman?" "Part of her," Not Graham said, his voice fading. "The part that remembers being human, the part that doesn't want this to happen to anyone else." And then he was gone. I was alone again, standing in front of the tree with its fresh carvings. "Don't you want to know what the lake is trying to tell you?" he asked. But it wasn't Graham's voice anymore, it was my voice, coming out of Graham's mouth. I took a step back. "You're not Graham." The thing that looked like Graham smiled. "No, but you knew that, didn't you? Deep down, you knew something was wrong. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard laughter, my own laughter, echoing through the forest. I ran blindly, not caring about direction anymore, just needing to get away. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to trip me, but I kept going. And then I was back at the lake. Again. I fell to my knees on the shore, sobbing with frustration and fear. I was trapped, completely, hopelessly trapped. And worse, the lake was now creating illusions, showing me things that weren't real, using them to torment me. As darkness fell again, I heard my satellite phone ring. I pulled it out, already knowing what I'd see. A call from myself. My own name on the caller ID. I answered it anyway. What else could I do? "Hello, Iris," my voice said from the phone. "We need to talk about why you're really here." "Who are you?" I asked. "What do you want?" "I'm you," the voice said. "The you that understands. The you that knows why you've been coming to this lake for months, documenting the birds, making recordings. You were looking for something, weren't you? Even if you didn't consciously know it." "That's not true," I said. But even as I spoke, doubt crept in. Was it true? Had some part of me been seeking this place out, drawn to its mysteries? "Listen to your recordings," the voice said. "Really listen. Not just to what's on them, but to what's beneath. The pattern. We've been trying to communicate, but you kept refusing to hear. So we had to try other methods. Show you things, make you experience it yourself." "Who's we?" I demanded. "Everyone who came before," the voice said. "Everyone who the lake took. We're all here, Iris, underneath the surface, and we're trying to warn you. If you don't listen, if you don't understand what we're trying to tell you, you'll end up like us, stuck, forever repeating the same patterns, the same mistakes." The call ended. I sat there holding the phone, my mind racing. Were they trying to help me? Or was this just another layer of torment, another way to break down my sanity? I pulled out my laptop and opened all my audio files. Every recording I'd made at Silence Lake, not just from this trip, but from previous visits over the past several months. I loaded them into audio analysis software and started looking for patterns. And I found them. Beneath every recording, under the normal sounds of forest and water and birds, there was another layer. A rhythm, almost like Morse code. A pattern of sounds too low for conscious perception, but present in every file. I isolated the pattern and amplified it. And then I heard the message, repeated over and over in dozens of voices. "Don't drink the water. The lake is in the water. It gets inside. It changes memory. It changes time. Don't drink the water." I thought back to my first day at the lake. I'd purified water from the lake to fill my bottles. I'd drunk it multiple times. The lake was inside me now. In my cells, my brain, my memory. It had been changing me from the inside, altering my perceptions, my sense of time, my ability to distinguish real from unreal. And now I understood. The rangers who came before, the ones who left warnings carved in trees and messages hidden in recordings, they'd all drunk from the lake. They'd all become part of it. And they were trying to warn others, trying to save people like me from the same fate. But they were trapped, unable to fully communicate, their messages fragmented and confusing. Because the lake didn't want them to be understood. The lake wanted more. More rangers, more visitors, more people to drink its water and become part of its collective consciousness. I looked out at the dark water, and for the first time, I understood what I was seeing. The lake wasn't just water. It was alive, conscious, and patient. It had been here for thousands of years, slowly growing, slowly collecting minds, and I was its newest addition. I tried one more time to call Graham. To my shock, the call went through. "Iris?" Graham's voice was tight with worry. "Where are you? We've had search teams out all day. Are you okay?" "Graham," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't come to Silence Lake, do you hear me? Don't come here. Quarantine the area. Don't let anyone drink from the water. There's something in it, something that affects the brain, changes perception and memory." "Iris, you're not making sense. Just tell me where you are. We'll come get you." "I'm at the lake," I said. "But I don't think I can leave, not anymore. I think I'm already too far gone. But you can warn others. You can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." "We're coming to get you," Graham said firmly. "Just stay where you are. We'll be there by morning." "Graham," I started, but the connection cut out. I sat there in the darkness, waiting. I didn't know if Graham would make it. I didn't know if anyone could help me now. But at least I'd tried to warn them. At least I'd figured out the truth, even if it was too late for me. As the night deepened, I heard the singing again, multiple voices this time, all around me, and I realized I recognized one of them. It was the woman I'd seen in the forest, the one who disappeared. She was singing the warning. They all were. In their own way, with the limited ability they had left, they were trying to save me. I pulled out my recorder one last time and made a final entry. "This is Iris Flynn, Park Ranger. If you're listening to this, if you've found my equipment, you need to know. Silence Lake is contaminated. The water contains something that affects human cognition and perception. Don't drink from it. Don't let anyone drink from it. Quarantine the area and get it tested. And if you hear voices in the recordings, if you hear warnings, listen to them. They're real. The people who came before are real, and they're trying to help." I paused, then added, "I don't know if I'll make it out of here. But if I don't, if I become another voice in the lake, I hope someone hears this. I hope someone listens, and I hope they do better than I did." I turned off the recorder and set it carefully on a rock where it would be visible. Then I lay down on the shore and looked up at the stars. If Graham came, I'd try to leave with him. I'd fight with everything I had left to break free of the lake's influence. But if I couldn't, if I was already too far gone, at least I'd left a warning. At least the next person would have a chance. The water lapped gently at the shore beside me, and in that gentle rhythm, I heard the voices again, not threatening, not sinister, just sad, endlessly, eternally sad. "Welcome home," they seemed to say. "Welcome home, Iris Flynn. You're one of us now." And the terrible thing was, part of me believed them.